What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the teens in this countdown up to the number one team in my power rankings heading into next season, as today we take a deep dive into my number 19 ranked Chicago Bears, a team that certainly has a load of hype heading into next year. I know my brother-in-law Adam is watching and is hyped up for this season coming up as well.
Let's go, Caleb. Let's go, Bears.
But with Caleb Williams coming in, what can this team be even as early as this year, as they went on a bit of a run at the end of last season and started to look like a bit of a football team? So a lot to talk about here today, a lot of expectations, and a team that could make some noise in the NFC if some of the things we're talking about today go in the right direction. Before we do get started, if you could take a second to hit that like button down below, I really appreciate it. It really does help. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the remaining deep dives as we lead up to the number one team. And make sure you stick around towards the end of the video. The wonderful Snyder is joining us for the Bears deep dive again this year. It's a great interview. You're not going to want to miss it. But without further ado, let's get started by taking a look at this team's offseason, where they got better, where they got worse. And we're going to start by talking about the coaching staff there, where they did make a change with the offensive coordinator. All the debate of, was it Fields' fault? Was it Luke Getsy's fault? And the Bears said, yes, goodbye to both of you. And they are going to reshuffle the deck at offensive coordinator, bringing in Shane Waldron from Seattle. We'll dive a little bit further into Shane Waldron when we get to the coaching portion of this video here. But as far as, was this upgraded? Is it downgraded? What can Bears fans expect here? I think that's very much to be determined from the offensive coaching. I think we can all agree that Luke Getsy stopped short of doing a good job for the Bears, but ask Seahawks fans, they're not really going to miss Shane Waldron either. Or ask one Jackson Smith and Jigba what he thought about Shane Waldron calling plays for him. So it's not that this is necessarily upgraded or downgraded, much more just this is to be determined and is going to be a big variable for this Bears team that we're going to get to talk about momentarily. But then at the quarterback room, even though Caleb Williams is a rookie, I do say upgraded over Justin Fields. It's funny how much can change in a year. I took a lot of flack for the things I said about Justin Fields in this deep dive last year, pointing out his flaws when he was a guy a lot of people were putting MVP bets on and saying he was the future of the Bears. And I was like pointing out his passing numbers like, hey, I don't know about that. There's a lot of stuff that he has to work on. There were issues at Ohio State that have not gotten better. Sure enough, last year, those things persisted. I said this team would be a sneaky team to get Caleb Williams if Fields wasn't bad. And here we are. They do get Caleb Williams. Granted, I didn't think it was going to be the Panthers pick that let them make that move. But for all the debate of, is Caleb Williams a generational prospect or is he just a really, really, really freaking good one? It's going to be pretty hard for me to say that this is not going to be better than what Justin Fields gave them last year, which was towards the bottom of the league in quarterback play. So I do say upgraded in the QB room. Then at running back, going slightly upgraded here. I know some Bears fans are going to cringe at that. I'm just personally not a huge DeAndre Swift guy. I think adding him and losing Deontay Foreman is, of course, some form of an upgrade, but it's not some massive upgrade for me, and we're going to have some thoughts on that when we get to the running back room here in this video. But again, slightly upgraded at running back. Then at tight end, likewise, slightly upgraded. I like the Gerald Everett signing. It's an upgrade to that tight end 2 spot from a Robert Tonyan. But he's not a starter. This isn't some massive addition, but a nice move. Enough to say that that group is slightly upgraded. But at wide receiver, even though they lose Darnell Mooney and Equanimeous St. Brown, this is upgraded. It's a testament to their offseason to lose a good player in Darnell Mooney, who I think is going to have success in Atlanta now that he has a quarterback that will actually look at him being the number 2 read. But they bring in Keenan Allen for a 4th-round pick who still had a monster season last year and a premium wide receiver talent in the early first round in Rome Odunze. They also added some depth in DeAndre Carter. So no doubt upgraded at wide receiver. Can't argue that. But the offensive line, definitely some shakeup there. They are saying goodbye to some players that played a lot of snaps for them last year, though they will not necessarily be missed by the Bears or certainly by Bears fans. Cody Whitehair and Lucas Patrick struggled last year. And then their additions were Ryan Bates, Coleman Shelton, and a developmental third-round tackle out of Yale and Kieran Amagaji. Gonna be tough to be worse than they were last year on the interior, but those aren't exactly the biggest investments and the biggest names to feel great about this offensive line being significantly upgraded. So we'll definitely have to have some conversations about this offensive line later on. But then you look at the defense, much less change on that side of the ball. They really got things going as the year went on. Now heading into year 3 with Matt Eberflus, he's getting more comfortable with a lot of the guys he's put in place here. So it makes sense that there's not as much turnaround here. But as you look at the interior of the defensive line, they are going to create some questions here. It was already a pretty bad group, and all they did was lose players there. Justin Jones on the way out did play 69% of their snaps, got about $10 million a year from the Cardinals. He's not a horrible player, so they do lose him and add nothing. It's a replaceable player, in my opinion, but you got to say slightly downgraded to what was already a really bad interior D-line. And then on the edge, look, Yannick Ngakoue was a big name collecting snaps for the Chicago Bears last year. But once you break down the fact that he was quite literally the least efficient pass rusher in all of football last year among players getting at least 50% of snaps for their teams, and the fact that he was as bad against the run as he's ever been, you could argue just about anybody was going to be an upgrade for this edge group just saying goodbye to him. He is purely a name, and they signed a name to hurt this defense last year. So no matter what they did there, this was going to be upgraded. But they do now get a full season of Montez Sweat. Was a midseason addition for them, but only played close to a third of their snaps last year, so they're probably going to get double that next year. You also add Jacob Martin and 5th-round pick Austin Booker. The only other loss was Rasheem Green, who played, replacement-level play on a third of their snaps. So they didn't make any huge moves this offseason. Of course, the midseason move for Sweat was in many ways an offseason move. They spent that 2nd-round pick in this draft to acquire Montez Sweat. So it is upgraded, especially when you consider how bad Yannick Ngakoue was for them. It's funny when I see Bears fans on Twitter saying they should bring him back, and I'm like, you literally were not watching. It was brutal. Literally no change at linebacker or corner, so obviously staying neutral there. And then at safety, they are making a swap of veterans here. Eddie Jackson, no longer with the team. He just signed with the Baltimore Ravens. And Kevin Byard gets brought in from Tennessee by way of Philadelphia after they traded for him around the deadline last year. So I do think that's a slight upgrade going from Jackson to Byard, especially with how Jackson played last year. Though nothing crazy in my opinion. And then in the special teams, nothing to really worry about here, but they are going to go with the 4th-round punter Torrey Taylor out of Iowa to replace Trenton Gill, who was for them. So to be determined with the special teams, they certainly hope will be upgraded. So all in all, it was a fairly quiet offseason other than the quarterback and wide receiver room for the most part. They clearly were fed up with how things looked with Fields and how things have looked for decades of quarterback play in Chicago. And they just want to make sure they have everything they need to let Caleb Williams thrive here. And we'll break down this roster to answer if they have that or not in a moment. But first, I do want to break down this coaching staff in depth. What this team's going to look like, schematically speaking, on both sides of the ball, and how this group ranks and stacks up against their peers in the league. So starting at head coach, you have Matt Eberflus, who did come on strong at the end of last season, started to show those flashes of why they hired him to be that top defensive mind in the league. And he certainly earned the right to come back this year. In any normal situation, he certainly would be back. But a lot of Bears fans were saying, hey, can we, start a new cycle, get a young offensive mind in here to work with Caleb Williams? Can you get a Ben Johnson or something like that to kind of have that natural marriage of quarterback and offensive-minded head coach that we know just can give you that elite Super Bowl type of ceiling? Whereas Matt Eberflus, it's like, yeah, I did a good job with this defense, but is he really like the guy at head coach? I think those are fair questions, and if I was a Bears fan, I would probably want the same. But in reality, when you hire a defensive coach and by the end of year 2, his system and his culture starts to show its flowers and that side of the ball gets better, they're going to stand by their decision and keep the guy. So you understand why he's here, and now you just have to look forward and hope you can get the absolute most out of Matt Eberflus. And while it would be exciting to go get that young offensive mind to pair with Caleb, I do still think Matt Eberflus has a very high ceiling as a defensive head coach. Granted, that's as a defensive head coach, right? If Shane Waldron hits here and things are clicking with the offense, he's going to go get a head coaching job somewhere and you'll be back to square one. So it does hurt your year-to-year consistency. And in an offensive league, the higher ceiling head coaches are going to be the true offensive gurus. So anytime you're talking about a defensive head coach, you got to bring up those disclaimers. But as far as coaching the defense, I think Matt Eberflus did some incredible stuff in Indianapolis, and it took him about 20 games in Chicago to get things going here. But year 2, you definitely started to see everybody get comfortable on that side of the ball. And of course, that married with getting a player like Montez Sweat so that they were at least adequate up front, played a big role there. But as far as the rankings for Matt Eberflus, I have him as a B+ grade in both pass and run defense coaching. For pass defense, he ranks in that big cluster of really good defensive coordinators in the league, 7th to 17th, so yet to really clear into that kind of elite tier. And then for run defense coaching, also B+, ranking inside the top 10, 6th to 10th, where they're very stout, at least schematically, though they have some weeks with a bad D-line where they did get run over last year. But I do think things got better as the year went on there, and again, you saw the scheme coming through. So things are certainly heading in the right direction, and when the Bears did hire Matt Eberflus, I really did feel like he could emerge someday as one of those premium defensive minds. And if you are going to stick with a defensive head coach, he has to be a top 5 defensive coordinator in the league, in my opinion. Otherwise, you're just not doing things the right way. So I do think it's a big year for him to kind of prove that he can continue to get this defense to head in the right direction, that the success they had late last season was a theme and not a random blip of success. And if he can, there is a world where he can remain a really good head coach for the Bears. I'm not all negativity on Matt Eberflus, but it is just by nature a little bit harder to get like super stoked on Matt Eberflus. And I have him ranked as the 22nd head coach in the league, given we're not ranking rookie coaches. So that's 22nd out of 26th. And basically he just has a lot to prove. There's been a lot of losing in Chicago in Matt Eberflus's tenure, with the exception of the back half of last year. So again, if he can keep that going, you'll see Matt Eberflus climbing up these ranks and getting more respect. And then besides like ranking Matt Eberflus, let's talk more about what his scheme looks like. And honestly, if you just picture sort of the basic 4-2 balanced defensive approach, Matt Eberflus is probably the first guy that comes to my mind. He wants to live in that 4-2 even front with 2 linebackers, 5 members in the secondary, a traditional slot corner, and he likes to mix up his coverage calls on the back end. I wouldn't really look at Matt Eberflus and say, oh, he's a cover 3 guy. Oh, he's a cover 2 guy. He's a man coverage guy. He's a quarters guy. One thing that I do respect about Matt Eberflus is he's very simplistic on the front end in terms of basically living in that 4-2 package. But I do feel like he's really good at mixing up the types of coverages he wants to run, looking at his personnel, asking, are we going to be better in cover 3 with this this group of players? Are we going to be better doing man coverage, like catering to their players, putting them in the best position to succeed, but also bringing some of that disguise element while he just wants to kind of stay static up front in that 4-2 type of look a lot of the time? He does do a good job of mixing in at the appropriate time when to disguise his coverages, getting into some of that too high disguise stuff with the late rotations where the quarterback has to break down what the coverage is after the snap. And just a good game planner, looking at opposing teams' tendencies, calling the right stuff at the right time, and putting together a good game plan in terms of the types of coverages they want to run against opposing offenses, depending on how they like to attack them. So he knows his stuff, and I do certainly have a lot of respect for how he's able to elevate a defense, because he did it in Indianapolis, and he's started to do that here in Chicago now. And he's got a little more help this year as well. Eric Washington was brought in from Buffalo, and they had some drama last year with Alan Williams, who's no longer with the team as their defensive coordinator. And Washington has basically spent the last 13 years under the Ron Rivera, Sean McDermott tree, which is a nice, meeting of the minds here, because McDermott's defense is also very much, in many ways, a static 4-2 defense that likes its diversity of zones on the back end. They're similar sort of, they're very much in the same family of defensive approach, but they're more cousins as opposed to brothers and sisters, if you will. McDermott definitely likes to lean into the more like pattern matching zone stuff, more so than Matt Eberflus. Again, not that Eberflus won't run that type of stuff. So you're getting a guy that's like going to be comfortable with the types of fronts that Matt Eberflus likes to run, being that just let's stay in 4-2 and not get too crazy, but might be able to bring some different perspectives to the table in terms of coverages and perhaps blitzes as well, where McDermott and Ron Rivera, I would argue, have shown more creativity as blitzing defensive minds than someone like Matt Eberflus, who wants to, at the end of the day, wants to win with 4 and have good coverage on the back end with 7 guys. So I like the hire. I like the influence. Seems like a guy that has earned this opportunity under some really good defensive minds over the years. Also coached with Lovie Smith in Chicago all the way back when. Not sure how much of that, Tampa 2 influence is still in there with Eric Washington. Eberflus does like Tampa 2 as well, so could see a slight rise in cover 2 this year. I don't know. We'll see. But, of course, as you would hope with a defensive head coach, they are going to grade out well and project well from that side of the ball. But as comes with the territory, you're going to get some shakeup at offensive coordinator and open up some question marks at offensive coordinator, bringing in Shane Waldron, who Seattle was pretty comfortable to not bring back with their new staff coming in. And Seahawks fans, certainly based on so many of the comments I saw throughout the year, are not going to miss Shane Waldron. Now, that's not a surprise. The offensive coordinator is always scapegoat number 1. Case in point, the Chicago Bears with Luke Getsy. But what I'm saying here is this is not a slam dunk hire. I'm also not going to say it's a bad hire, but this is not guaranteed to be the dude that Chicago wants with Caleb Williams. I think there's a lot of questions with Shane Waldron in terms of, I think what it really boils down to when I've watched the Seahawks is they've really struggled with a ton of talent to find an identity with that offense. It felt like Shane Waldron could put together some fun passing concepts and some interesting formations and create some explosive plays with all these exciting players that they had there. But when we talk so much about, this offensive mind knows exactly what buttons to push and when to push them, being totally in sync with the flow of the game and having that feel for the predictive nature of okay, we set this up and now we know we're going to get a blitz, or we know we're going to get quarters, or we know we're going to get single high, and then having that next thing in line to really stack up play calling as the game goes on, that is really felt missing in Seattle, and the lack of an identity. I mean, think about the Seahawks offense and all the players they've had over the last couple of years under Shane Waldron. You can picture some of the big moments and the exciting plays, but you couldn't really think of what it is that they've been doing that's been working, right? you certainly can't point to a plan of attack that they go to base that offense out of, whether it's a shotgun-based offense that taps into the RPO game, or it's this successful wide zone run game, or a really successful play action attack, or using motion really well, right? Like all these top offensive minds kind of have that go-to trick that they then base the rest of their offense off of. Shane Waldron has not had that in Seattle, so he's got very good talent again here in Chicago. There have certainly been some good moments in Seattle, and I think he does get some of the credit for working with Geno Smith and bringing him back up to relevancy. Obviously, Dave Canales as well gets a lot of credit for that too, but this is a coach with a lot to prove, and certainly not someone I'm going to rank all that high coming into the year. I'm just not, especially in run game coaching, where they've been exhausting to watch in Seattle. Not only an overall ineffective run game, but an offense that you watch and feel like there's tons of plays blown up in the backfield, and a lack of creativity as well. Getting a little bit too static with the wide zone run game. And let's face it, Shane Waldron isn't the only Sean McVay disciple to struggle to get the run game going. We just talked about this with Kevin O'Connell. And for a long time, Sean McVay struggled to get the run game going until he really learned how to pivot last year into more gap stuff and not leaning so heavily into the wide zone. So Waldron absolutely has to prove that he can get the run game going. Hell, Dave Canales as well had the same problems in Tampa. So there is something to that for sure. Canales, of course, was under Waldron in Seattle in 2022. But then pass game coaching, they do rank a little bit better for me with a C+ grade, 20th to 24th. And, if you're going to argue Waldron versus Getsy, I do think Getsy had a lot of success with the run game in Chicago, but their passing concepts were really bad at times. I think with Waldron, I don't really have questions on if he can draw up good passing concepts. There was plenty of those in Seattle. So there is some optimism there. And I don't want to just dunk on this hire. So it's a good groundwork for a new hire to be ranking 20th to 24th there for pass game coaching. But some of that game flow stuff is where you start to question if things are going to work here for Shane Waldron. But if there is a big difference between Getsy to Waldron, both guys coming from this Sean McVay wide zone play action oriented family, it's going to be that Waldron is probably better in terms of designing the pass game, whereas Getsy was, maybe more of a run game specialist. So obviously, if you want the guy that Caleb is going to succeed under, you would think this will be preferable to Getsy, and that is music to Bears fans' ears. And we'll just have to wait and see how this hire works out for Chicago. And next, we are going to break down this roster position by position, how each group ranks stacked up against the rest of the league. But first, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Football season is fastly approaching here. Training camps are underway. But I'll tell you this, you don't have to wait till mid to late August to start doing fantasy drafts and start competing for money in your fantasy drafts, because right now you can draft for best ball leagues at Underdog Fantasy. Best ball is so fun. It is all about the draft, which, let's face it, is the best part of fantasy football. There's no trades, there's no waivers, there's no having to set your lineup every week. They will just retroactively set your highest scoring lineup based on the players you drafted here right now. And you can do $2 leagues just for fun, just because you want to draft and practice some, kind of mock draft situations for your home leagues. Or you can enter the big money leagues for a chance at huge, huge winnings. However you want to play best ball, you can do it at Underdog Fantasy. You can also get ready for the weekly pick'ems, which in my opinion are the absolute best way to play daily fantasy and increased your interest in any given football Sunday or crappy Thursday night football matchup as well, maybe even more so with the former. But yeah, I love Underdog Fantasy. I'm super happy to be partnered with them. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG or just scan the barcode on the screen, they will give you up to a $250 match on your first deposit, and you will support my channel in a big, big way. So thanks to Underdog, thanks to you, and let's get back to the Bears. All right, this is a fun roster to break down, especially on the offensive side of the ball with the quarterback and the weapons here. And let's talk quarterback here. So Caleb Williams coming in as the number 1 overall pick, the golden boy, the golden arm, all the hype in the world, right? And it almost feels like there isn't that much to talk about. We spent 4 months profiling Caleb Williams. I have a 30-minute video breakdown on Caleb, which I would highly recommend you go watch if you want my full thoughts and analysis on his film and who he is as a prospect. You got the draft grades video. You got the top 10 quarterbacks ranking. There's been so much analysis on this channel and over the last 5 months on Caleb Williams. And now it's just like, all right, let's go see it at the pro level. He was just an absolute no-doubter, number 1 pick. There was never a doubt, really, that they were going to move on from Fields and take this opportunity to draft Caleb Williams. And this is such a unique situation where I'm on the record saying, at least in my life, 30-plus years, this is the best situation a number 1 overall pick at quarterback has ever entered into. And obviously a huge part of that is the fact that this wasn't the Bears' actual pick. They went on a winning streak late. They proved that they are a ascending team heading in the right direction. And they also had this pick because they moved out of the number 1 pick the year before and loaded up on assets. Guys like DJ Moore, a pick that turned into a right tackle for them. And yet another second-round pick this upcoming draft as well. And we still have a lot to talk about in terms of what the weapons look like and what the offensive line is going to look like. But needless to say, I'm very optimistic that Caleb Williams is going to have at least a really good rookie quarterback season. And I have learned my lesson, with Bryce Young last year and Zach Wilson, there are quarterbacks that I have really loved and many people have really loved in the draft that I have really hyped up as rookies. And I've had to learn my lesson that sometimes these guys do just have a lower floor than you expect. But it's just so hard to imagine that happening here with Caleb Williams. Not only was he a more talented quarterback prospect than those 2 guys, which obviously matters, but the defensive support and the guys he's going to get to throw to, I think are really going to give a warm welcome to Caleb Williams here in the NFL. And as I've said, we are ranking these players and these teams at their floor. Well, as a rookie, I have Caleb Williams ranked as the 20th overall quarterback to start the year. 22nd in passing, and then going up a little bit over some of those guys like Baker Mayfield and Derek Carr, who we've profiled already. Jumping them because of the run multiplier, bringing some of that added value with his feet. And then if you want to talk about ceiling, my goodness, I do think it's in the realm of possibilities for Caleb Williams to be a top 10 quarterback within his rookie season. We saw that last year with a CJ Stroud. It's not all the bad outcomes. It's not all the Bryce Youngs and the Zach Wilsons, right? I do think there is a world in here as well where he balls out and gets the Bears in the playoff picture and plays like a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback and really looks like that all-time franchise quarterback that the Bears are really hoping that they get. And I know that's crazy expectations, but that's where we are at with Caleb Williams. And he doesn't have to be that this year, but you definitely are hoping he can at least play at this floor, look like a top 20 or so quarterback, and you're going to feel pretty good about where things are going here. And that just means bring those explosive plays that we know are going to be there and know can be there. That was such an easy selling point on Caleb Williams, is the athletic ability, the arm talent, the instincts. You don't need an NFL scout to point those things out for you. But you want to see inside the structure of an NFL offense look okay in terms of processing and decision-making, limit the interceptions as much as you can for a rookie quarterback, and just show that those big criticisms on him that he can't play on time, show that those were overblown. It doesn't have to be perfect. There can be plays where he's holding the ball too long and leans on his feet and tries to do a little bit too much at times that might hurt his consistency a little bit within his rookie season. But definitely show us that those concerns were overblown, that he held the ball and played hero ball too much because he was trying to drag a below-average USC offense towards championship contention. Hopefully the Bears have put him in a situation where he doesn't have to press quite like that. And you can see a guy whose processing and decision-making is a little bit underrated or better than some of his critics said for him coming out. So that's a big thing to look for this year. Anything beyond that, I'm going to, again, just recommend you check out my Caleb Williams prospect profile video on him that was in January, but my thoughts on him really have not changed since the first time I watched his film, because the takeaway was, yeah, this guy needs to be the number one pick. He was the number one pick, and he hasn't played any football since then. So a well-covered player with a ton of hype, true top 3 quarterback in the NFL upside, and someone that I think has a pretty high floor as a rookie as well. And I guess I'll just end this segment by saying, as a Packers fan, this is genuinely the first time I'm afraid of the Chicago Bears in my lifetime. And that's got to be the biggest compliment I can give this football team. As far as the backup quarterback room is concerned, well, there's not really a whole lot of concerning going on about this backup room at all. It is year 2 undrafted free agent Tyson Bagent, who did step in and, rallied the fan base for about a minute last year. If he's in the game, either something went really well for the Bears or really bad for the Bears. And I'll just leave it at that. Could he be a career backup type? Yeah, maybe, but this season is over if you need any sort of significant playing time there. But let's talk about the group of weapons that Caleb gets to throw to and why really the floor is so high, but also the ceiling. Just from a wide receiver trio perspective, you could make an argument this is the best wide receiver trio. But in terms of overall weaponry, I have the Bears ranking 5th to 6th with an A- grade, again, inside a league that has some ridiculous teams in terms of weaponry. And the Bears are up there with some of these guys. So high praise here. Let's start with DJ Moore. While he hasn't had that true elite season, right, that 1,800-yard, 16 touchdown, first team all-pro type of year from a statistical standpoint, DJ Moore is everything from a skill set perspective that you could want for your number one wide receiver. And frankly, from a film evaluation standpoint, I have no knocks on him to say that he couldn't be someone that gets into that, top 4 truly elite category this year. But the production just hasn't quite been there. But if you're looking for the true alpha skill set, which by my definition is a number one wide receiver that can threaten to all 3 levels, is a threat after the catch, and is ultimately someone you can funnel your offense through, I do think DJ Moore could be that. Does he need to be that guy here? No, not necessarily. They got so many other guys to throw to, but he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the route running. He's underrated after the catch, frankly. I would say he's up there with like Deebo Samuel and Jamar Chase in terms of what he can do after the catch, turning into a running back after the catch. He's got that in his bag. He tracks the deep ball. He wins contested catches. He's massively improved his drop issues over the last couple of years. He's incredible. And the Panthers obviously look like morons for giving this guy up, but all to the Bears' benefit. He is absolutely a number one wide receiver that any team in the NFL should be more than happy with if he's your number one. And probably one of the first guys that I personally want if I'm building a team once you get past that like elite crop, the JJ, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb cluster. And beyond that, I don't even really know what else to say. But then you bring in Keenan Allen, who's a marvelous complement to DJ Moore because Moore brings the juice. He's a number one receiver. Like I said, if you want, you can funnel your offense through him. And then to have the crafty savant complement in Keenan Allen, who's not the biggest, not the fastest, not the most incredible after the catch, but an absolute nuisance for number 2 corners now to have to cover because he still has incredible release off the line of scrimmage. He might be the best wide receiver in the league right now in terms of reading out zone defenses, finding those soft spots, being quarterback friendly to get open against zone, to know that he's getting open against zone, to throw his hands up and be like, Caleb, here, I'm right here, I got you, in scramble drill especially, to kind of read out the play and find the openings in the defense as the play breaks down. He is one of the headiest, smartest wide receivers. He can be in many ways. We compare Caleb Williams to Patrick Mahomes. There's going to be a lot of times where Keenan Allen has that Travis Kelce-esque feel to him where the play breaks down and then out of nowhere, Keenan just pops open. And you've got a 20-yard completion in scramble drill. And I said he's not the biggest guy, but he's got plenty of size. He wins tough catches, can have some frustrating drops at times, but for the most part is incredibly sure-handed and can still beat one-on-one coverage, especially when he's going to be getting the demands of a lot of number 2 corners as opposed to a lot of number 1s that he had to see last year. And based on the tape last year, he totally still has it. The only reason he was available for so cheap is he's 32 years old and has a crazy track record of injuries. Was able to stay healthy last year, but there is very substantial risk, not just for the future that, okay, maybe you're only getting 1 year of Keenan Allen here, but risk within this season that he will be banged up, he will miss time, because over the course of his career, that has more often than not been the story on Keenan Allen. So when he's out there, you have quite possibly the best wide receiver duo in the league, and that's really hard to say right now, because there's a lot of incredible duos. But I do think this like week 1, when these guys are both healthy and available, it's going to be up there. And again, I just love how complementary these two guys' skill sets are. And both guys, by the way, can line up outside or inside in the slot. But what gets really cool here is you draft Rome Odunze with the 9th overall pick, and my literal pro comp for Rome Odunze was Keenan Allen. So it's pretty crazy how things played out this way. But, I mean, stop me if this sounds familiar. Rome Odunze, he got good size, but he's not necessarily the biggest guy in the world. Certainly not the fastest guy in the world, but he's got quick feet. He's got great release off the line of scrimmage. He's super smart to sit down in zone coverages. Does have the size to win tough catches. Is a natural on back shoulders. He's Keenan Allen in so many ways. So not only is it like, okay, great, you have 2 of those guys. As I mentioned, any of these guys can line up from the slot or outside. I'm not really worried about like redundancy of skill sets there, especially when DJ Moore can win deep. And Rome Odunze is a really exciting ball winner down the field. Even Keenan can do some of that. It's just you probably won't ask him to go deep at this age when you have Odunze and Moore to do that. But I think in terms of finding that diversity of skill sets and complementary weapons who play off of each other, for now, you have an incredible trio that can really do it all. But it's probably an even better pick for all of the things we said about Keenan Allen and his lack of durability and the fact that he is 32 years old. I think it's even better to know that whenever Keenan Allen is not here, whether that's this year or into the future, Rome Odunze will so easily be able to slide into that role. And you're going to be able to build that role up here from the get-go with a Keenan Allen, and then Rome Odunze can step into that, being more of the short to intermediate, crafty, tough dude to complement DJ Moore for the long haul. So it's almost like this conundrum of like, okay, are we more excited for the trio of these 3 now, or the concept of like how perfect DJ Moore with Rome Odunze as wide receiver 2 opposite of him in terms of having that complementary skill set duo there long term? It's almost like, what are you more excited for? And you could tell me either side you're more excited for it, and I think that's fair. It's a good spot for the Bears to be. Now, if there is like any negative thing or any question to raise here, it's like, just how good is Rome Odunze going to be as a rookie? I will say, like, he was a really high floor prospect, and it's not too often that a top 10 wide receiver becomes your wide receiver 3, right? Like, you can take guys in the top 10 sometimes, ask too much of them to be a 1 or even a 2, and it's like, okay, they still have some stuff to improve upon if they're going to be that. But is there a single thread of doubt that Rome Odunze can step in as a rookie and be a wide receiver 3 in the NFL? Absolutely not. He was incredibly high floor for all the reasons we broke down. But is he going to be Keenan Allen right away? No, that's really hard to project. I think it's in the range of outcomes. We've seen some of these rookie wide receivers step in and just be insane right away. So I can't just rule it out. But to expect him to have all of those subtle nuances that Keenan Allen has been able to win with in terms of always sitting down in the right spot, being in the right place in scramble drill, when to push off, use that savviness at the catch point. There's just so much that Keenan Allen has learned over the years that, what a good spot for Rome Odunze to have that mentor, but it's just tough to expect that all of that is just there right away with Odunze. And then I will just add on top, I think some people said he was in the same tier as Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors as wide receiver prospects. I wasn't quite there on that. I wasn't really convinced that Rome Odunze in a most likely scenario could be an alpha, a number one, like a DJ Moore. But hey, he doesn't have to be that, right? He can be Keenan Allen, who's kind of flirted throughout his years of being more of a 2 than a 1. He's had a couple years where he just goes apeshit on the NFL, and maybe Odunze could become that. But for the most part, Keenan Allen's been perfect scenario, he's a 2. And I think Odunze, perfect scenario, he's a 2. And what a spot for him to land here in Chicago. You could raise some questions about the depth. So in those situations where Keenan Allen does go down, you're leaning on probably DeAndre Carter, who I'm not going to lie, you could do worse than DeAndre Carter to step in and 11 personnel to kind of just bring some juice when you still have DJ Moore and Rome Odunze out there. So it's okay depth, nothing that's terribly exciting. I think was a necessary signing, though, just to kind of have somebody in this room that's produced and brings a little bit of juice, because both Tyler Scott and Velus Jones are mid-round picks in recent drafts that are really unproven. Physically talented guys, but Velus Jones is already 83 years old in his third year in the NFL. That's a joke. He's only 27. But he was already a raw, strictly just a run-after-catch threat and has not developed a lick in the NFL, so you're not counting on him. And then Tyler Scott got a lot of buzz coming out. I was lower on Tyler Scott, and I would say in his rookie year, I was more in the camp of looking right on Tyler Scott. He just was very much a one-trick pony at Cincinnati, was drafted for his speed, but I think has really struggled to weaponize his speed as a football player. I think the idea of Tyler Scott to this point in time is better than the actual end product, and we saw the inability to track the deep ball and the lack of ball skills. He's more of just an athlete out there, so pushing him down to more of a special teams and wide receiver 5 role, I think was necessary for this team. And then frankly, guys like Dante Pettis, Colin Johnson, even all the way down to Freddie Swain, who's made some plays for Seattle. Obviously some familiarity there with Waldron coming over. Those guys, honestly, I think are probably more equipped to step in and get actual wide receiver reps than guys like Tyler Scott and Velus Jones. So you probably see one or two of those guys stick around in the practice squad, and if you get injuries, they might get called up and get some reps on this team and could probably do okay as an emergency, wide receiver on third downs. And then as you shift to the tight end room, this team is going to have the flexibility to get into 12 personnel. I don't know how much they're going to want to do that when you have those 3 wide receivers. Of course, 12 personnel, you're going 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and a running back. So you're probably going to have a pretty reduced role for a Gerald Everett, who they brought in free agency. It's more of a they have the flexibility to come out and do 12 personnel. And Waldron did love 3 tight end packages and 2 tight end packages in Seattle because they had a bunch of different tight ends. And even though they had 3 great wide receivers in Seattle, they still did some of that stuff. So you will see Gerald Everett come out, and he's going to be that wing tight end. When they go play action, he can run deep crossers and Y-leak, bring you some explosiveness from that tight end position and scheme up some looks for him. Very much a specific role signing, so not someone that is going to be some major fantasy football stud or any sort of consistent statistical producer for this team, but could be a sneaky impact for the Bears, where if Waldron's doing a good job, he's able to come in with some gut punches at the right time. and weaponize Gerald Everett in a good way. So I like that signing, and I don't know why we talked about Everett before Cole Kmet. It's not a disrespect to Cole Kmet. It's just where the conversation started there. But obviously Cole Kmet is their full-time starting tight end. He's the guy that can put his hand in the dirt and block. You wish he was a little better at it. He's gotten incrementally better since he got into the league, but he has the size to be a better blocker. I think that has held him back a little bit, in my opinion. But in terms of what he is as a receiving presence, sure-handed guy, pretty tough after the catch, wins tough catches, has the size, and the list of praises kind of stops there. His target volume went up last year, and he had a pretty productive year. Over 700 yards, 6 touchdowns, made some nice plays down in the red zone. He's a good possession tight end that I do wish was a little bit better as a blocker. I think Bears fans overrate him from time to time. I think he's fine. You could do worse. You could certainly do a lot better. Pretty firmly to me, like about the 16th best tight end in the NFL. But hey, that's pretty damn good still when he's going to be your 4th or 5th most targeted player on this offense, right? And for what it's worth, he now gets pushed down the pecking order in terms of target volume. And the types of targets he's getting are still things that this team is going to need in terms of tight underneath throws, check and releases as a blocker, the occasional tight end screen. You know, when he's just kind of that annoying guy underneath that consistently catches the ball and can do a little bit after the catch, that makes a lot more sense as opposed to last year where they kind of needed someone else to step up and be a dynamic playmaker. Cole Kmet saw a lot of those targets and he wasn't able to deliver that. But again, for what they're going to ask him to do, he makes a ton of sense here. And then while we're on the topic of tight ends, you do still have Mercedes Lewis here, who is almost as old as Velus Jones, 40 years old this year, but a true blocking specialist. But like we said with Waldron, he liked to get into 13 personnel, and those 3 guys actually make a ton of sense. You've got all blocking, you have kind of down the middle with Cole Kmet, and then you have kind of all receiving with Gerald Everett, very similar to what they had in Seattle with Disley, Fant, and Parkinson last year. So definitely going to see some Mercedes Lewis. I think he does make this team, and they have a fullback as well in Blasingame. So I don't think Carlson or Sweeney make the team. But then at running back, this is a fascinating split, and I don't want to spoil everything because we do talk a lot about this with EJ in the interview, but I fully expect Swift to be the primary third down back. It is a little funny that my pro comp on Marshawn Lloyd, who obviously played with Caleb Williams, was DeAndre Swift. So it's going to be a familiar skill set for Caleb in terms of having a guy to dump the ball to underneath, throw screens to, but a very dynamic athlete with the ball in his hands. And they can weaponize that. And he can just be a total nuisance underneath. They don't need to lean into him. He'll be there when they want him. And when they want to kind of tap into his athleticism on a screen, useful in that regard, but it is worth noting he's dealt with drops throughout his career, especially in Detroit, and he's been kind of a hit or miss pass blocker. So I can't say he's a special receiving back, but he's going to bring some juice. And if you were missing anything with this receiving core after DJ Moore, it is probably a little bit of juice, because with all due respect to Keenan Allen, Roman Dunze, and Cole Kmet, I certainly would not say juice is their game. So the DeAndre Swift analysis is at least positive when it comes to what he is as a receiving threat. The other guys will get in the mix. Roschon is going to be the best pass blocker and probably the most reliable pair of hands as well. So I do think he's going to get probably a quarter of the snaps. Travis Homer was initially brought in for his pass protection. I don't know how much they're going to use him at this point. And then I do think Khalil Herbert's probably going to be the odd man out for third down, because he has really struggled in the receiving game going all the way back. So that wraps up this remarkable group of weapons. I mean, they rank super high. Some Bears fans might want them to be even higher, but it's just, dude, there are some ridiculous groups of weapons in the NFL, and the Bears just don't rank higher than those guys. But I really run out of anything negative to say short of that. So You talk about Caleb having a high floor. You talk about what the upside could look like with this offense this year. It is centered around Caleb Williams and everything we've talked about to this point. Now, this has obviously been a really positive conversation so far, especially with the roster, but it does slowly take a turn here. The rest of the offense has some questions, and then as we'll see later, there's some aspects of the defense that still need work. We praise the DeAndre Swift signing in terms of what I think he'll be as a scat back on third down, but the signing really doesn't make sense to me for the run game. I'm going to be honest. I'm really not a DeAndre Swift guy as a running back, just like the Detroit Lions weren't when they shipped him off for a fourth-round pick to then spend a first-round pick to replace him in Jahmyr Gibbs. And the Eagles weren't when they let him walk and then went and signed Saquon Barkley. So both of the teams that have had DeAndre Swift were like, goodbye, Swift, and let's get as far away from that as possible by investing big time at running back, being a high first-round pick and paying up for Saquon Barkley $14 million a year. And I don't think that's a coincidence. DeAndre Swift, and this is not a real stat, but it's a real stat if you watch the games. DeAndre Swift definitely leads the league in frustrating, bounced, well-blocked runs outside runs in the league, if that makes sense. He leads the league in the amount of times that the offensive line blew dudes up at the line of scrimmage and then turned around to see DeAndre Swift getting tackled for a 2-yard loss. And not only are those bad plays for the running back, but those are moments where the coach is furious, the offensive line is demoralized, they're drive-killing plays. And in my opinion, the 2 times a game where he picks the right hole or shows off this incredible juke move and the athletic ability that he does have, those don't outbalance the bad plays from DeAndre Swift. And a lot of people are going to look and be like, oh, he had a career year last year. He had 1,000 yards. Well, it's the same thing that happened with Miles Sanders the year before. The Philadelphia Eagles are the most running back friendly situation in the NFL. Great offensive line and a quarterback that's a designed run threat. Of course, DeAndre Swift had 1,000 yards on 239 attempts. But you also got to remember, 300 of those yards came in week 2 and week 3. From week 4 on, he was a week-to-week frustration for the Eagles. And you now pay him and put him in what I felt was a pretty solid running back room and muddy things up. I just don't get it. I don't really like it. I don't think that he's so much better in the receiving game compared to a Roschon that showed plenty of flashes last year, or compared to a Khalil Herbert that I think if you threw him the ball more, could probably do some of the stuff that DeAndre Swift does. I don't think that outweighs kind of muddying up this running back room and making things kind of weird here. Ultimately, it's not the end of the world, but I actually would feel better about this running back room if they just never signed DeAndre Swift, because I think Khalil Herbert is a more talented running back, but I don't know how much he's going to play, because I think Herbert has better vision. I know he has better vision. I think he's better contact balance. He's more efficient. He's more consistent. He fumbles less, and he has everything to prove being in a contract year this year. But with Swift being the kind of juice back, the speed back, and Roschon being as good as he was in his rookie year in those no-nonsense runs, mixing them in between the tackles, short yardage, being someone that is going to get out there on third down, I think, this very much is that Kenneth Murray being DeAndre Swift here and Roschon being Zach Charbonnet. With Shane Waldron coming in from Seattle, where does Khalil Herbert fit into this outside of just being someone that you kind of mess around and give him 4 carries a game maybe and disrupt the flow of the offense and just kind of keep people guessing, I guess? I don't know. To me, this screams Khalil Herbert should get traded somewhere else. And if I am Khalil Herbert, I'm saying, fine, you don't believe in me? You signed DeAndre Swift? Send me somewhere I can play and make some money in the 4th year of his career here. And ultimately, I just don't think we see a whole lot of Khalil Herbert. So needless to say, man, I don't rank this group too high. They get a C+ grade for me. You got 3 guys that can play. It's not going to hold this group back. And at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. but they rank 21st to 27th. I think they'll be able to, this is a group that will allow the Bears to do what they want to do in the run game with some frustrating moments from DeAndre Swift and some exciting moments from DeAndre Swift. It's been the story on his career. Roshan doing a good job as the RB2, which is kind of his projection coming out of Texas, being a good backup, kind of Thunder back, if you will. But certainly not a group that's like elevating the run game into anything crazy for me. If anything here is going to do that, it would be Caleb Williams. So they get a B- grade for the QB run multiplier. That ranks 10th to 14th. Based on Caleb's skill, I would actually say it's more of a B or a B+. That was maybe the thing that impressed me the most about Caleb Williams was actually how good he was on designed runs. Really shifty, but he's got contact balance and size. He's got toughness. I saw a lot of like Josh Allen in him as a runner. I think there's some of that the Bears could tap into, but you want to protect your young guy. You don't want him getting hit too much and put into a lot of running situations where he's taking a beating. And Shane Waldron had a guy in Geno that's underrated with the ball in his hands too, and they didn't run the ball with him too much either. So, I think they could get even more than how we're ranking them for the QB run multiplier right now. But it's more of a question of like, is that something they want? And is that something they can prove to be more of a feature of this offense? But it's certainly something to keep an eye on there. But then, of course, we have to talk offensive line. There's a lot of questions that come in with this group as well, though they rank out very solid. They come in as my 18th overall offensive line, 17th in pass blocking, and 14th to 17th in run blocking. So it certainly isn't bad, but it does have some questions. But you're not going to have questions at left tackle. Braxton Jones, in my opinion, has established himself as a very quality left tackle. Maybe doesn't have like the insane traits to be an elite left tackle, but for all of the people that were saying left tackle's a need for the Bears in the draft, I was like, it really isn't. You can definitely get by with Braxton Jones as your left tackle, and he, in theory, should only get better, and he does have traits. He's a good athlete. He's got the size. I like Braxton Jones a lot, and I do think, Caleb does like to hold the ball, but it was even worse with Justin Fields, who holds the ball and has bad pocket presence. So I think Braxton Jones could get elevated by having a quarterback that can be a little bit more offensive line friendly, play in structure a little bit better, and step up in the pocket and manage that space a little bit better. But yeah, Braxton Jones, very good left tackle. I don't really have any questions about him. And then at left guard, Tevin Jenkins. I don't have questions about Tevin Jenkins as a football player. The question with him is just going to be availability. He's missed time every year in the NFL and fell in the draft. Remember, was a guy pretty much everybody agreed was a first-round caliber prospect, and his play on the field in both phases as he's slid into guard from tackle, the dude's a stud. He has got some of the best play strength you'll see on the offensive line. He had pretty good technique as a pass blocker at tackle. That has showed up at guard. He has plenty of foot speed relative to his size to hang with the quicker rushers on the inside, and is not someone that's very easy to push back. So, and he's got that true dickhead mentality you look for. There's a lot to like with him. It's just, can he stay on the field? He fell in the draft because of injury questions, and they've come to fruition in the league. And it's more of like he gets banged up, he missed games here and there. So you're almost, it's very similar to me to like the conversations we have about Teron Armstead in Miami, where it's like, great when he's out there, but what's your plan in the 6 weeks where he's not? You almost have to plan for that if you're the Bears. And they kind of have. They signed 2 interior offensive linemen, both guys in Ryan Bates and Coleman Shelton that have started and have had some interior flexibility in terms of being center and guard. They brought both these guys in, Bates through a trade and Shelton through free agency. So you are a little bit more protected now in the event of that Tevin Jenkins injury, where I think Bates could kick out to guard and Shelton could step in at center, or in a situation where Nate Davis does not win the starting job, which is in play, Nate Davis could step in and give you good play off the bench. Nate Davis, let's just talk about him and then come back to Ryan Bates. Nate Davis has not been worth what they paid him last year. He was close to a turnstile in pass protection, had a couple good weeks, but for the most part really struggled, also dealt with injuries himself and wasn't the impact as a run blocker that he was in Tennessee, where that was at least something he could hang his hat on. Was, early downs, he was an ass kicker inside that wide zone offense with Derrick Henry and those good, I can't say good, but those better Titans offensive lines. He certainly wasn't able to translate that over here in Chicago. So he is going to have to kind of earn the starting job this year. They really haven't guaranteed that he's going to get that job. And Shelton is in the mix, where Shelton could be the starting center, and Ryan Bates, one of the starting guards. So we're kind of getting at this in a roundabout way here, but let's go to Ryan Bates, because I do think this will be the starting five, in my opinion, at least week one. But yeah, Ryan Poles has been trying to get his hands on Ryan Bates a couple times now. He finally got it done with a trade with Buffalo. Bates started in 2022 for Buffalo and played solid. He looked like a baseline starting caliber interior offensive lineman. Played some center, played some guard. And they're obviously hoping they can get that from him, even though it was a year ago. He went back to the bench last year for Buffalo, played just 35 snaps. He's an undrafted free agent out of Penn State, someone that isn't the biggest guy, isn't the fastest guy, isn't the strongest guy, but a tough dude out of Penn State. It's a reminder to bring in those Penn State, Michigan, Notre Dame offensive linemen. If they're sitting around 6th, 7th round and they're available, just bring them in. More often than not, they turn into the Ryan Bateses of the world. And if they can get 2022 Ryan Bates at center or at guard, it would be an upgrade from one of those two interior spots from what they got last year. So solid move, nothing crazy, but was a necessary one for this team. And then, Coleman Shelton, we've hinted at him a little bit, but I do think he'll get in the mix. He's actually been a very capable starting center for the Rams. He's very undersized. If you leave him one-on-one, he can get bulldozed, but he's tough. He's a solid athlete, at least has a good first step, understands how to win leverage, and just has a lot of snaps under his belt at this point inside essentially this offense, being coming from Sean McVay's offense here, going to play for Shane Waldron. So certainly doesn't have the ceiling of a Nate Davis, who's just way stronger, way more athletic, but they might prefer the floor of a Coleman Shelton. Certainly something to monitor, but I do think they most likely will settle in as Shelton as a versatile backup, which again would just raise the floor from what they had last year. Before we talk about Darnell Wright, I do want to at least note Jatiri Carter. He actually did get some starts last year and showed some promise. He was certainly a developmental 7th round pick out of Southern University, but heading into year 3, I don't want to just entirely write him off either. He does have the traits, so at least someone to keep an eye on in a backup situation as someone that maybe could play well, but not something you'd want to count on there. But let's talk about the last piece here, Darnell Wright at right tackle. Really good rookie season. In particular, answered a lot of questions myself and many had about his run blocking. He was kind of weird at Tennessee, where you obviously knew he could run block any individual play. He has massive, he's got great play strength, a pretty good first step for such a big guy, and definitely tries as a run blocker. But at Tennessee, he dipped his head, he missed his strikes, he fell off blocks way too often. And it was a question of is he going to be a great run blocker in the NFL? How well is he going to improve those things? And it took one year of NFL coaching to kind of rein things in a little bit, not be quite as much of a headhunter as a run blocker, and it really helped his consistency. And then he was also able to, when they would pull him, he could kind of let loose a little bit and be that heat-seeking missile where you saw some more of those impact blocks as well. But on a play-to-play basis was definitely just keeping his head up, doing a much better job there. So he really impressed me as a run blocker. As far as what he was as a pass blocker, it was actually very close to what I expected. A high floor pass blocker, got the job done, but he is a guy that he doesn't have the best feet. His arm length is on the shorter side of things, 33 3/4, which is long enough, but when you don't have great feet and you don't have 35-inch arms, your range is just reduced, and you are going to be set up to lose against some really good pass rushers in the NFL, and we certainly saw that. He had his down moments as a pass blocker, And I question if he was, like I said, he had a high floor, great anchor, pretty good technique, just some physical deficiencies as a pass blocker. We saw that high floor as a rookie, but I always question his upside as a tackle. Is he ever going to be a lockdown, high-end pass protecting right tackle? Reminds me a lot, actually, of a lot of the stuff we've said about Talise Fuanga in this year's draft class. I don't know. I think he can still get better at recognizing certain counters and stuff and still get better, but I don't know that he's ever going to be a great pass protecting right tackle. If he can be a little bit better than he was last year, though, you feel pretty good about who he is as a right tackle, and you don't really have to worry about that. And I do expect that the arrow is pointing up on him and his overall efficiency improves. And honestly, if he can continue to get even better as a run blocker, prove to be an elite run blocking right tackle, and just a solid above average pass blocker, that can be well worth the 10th overall pick that they spent on him, especially as a right tackle, where teams are still kind of in that thinking of like the best pass protector should be the left tackle, right? In terms of tackle depth, you do have Larry Borum, I think is a very good swing tackle. He's been well worth that kind of mid-round pick that they spent on him. They've had to play him a lot, and of course, he hasn't emerged as a starter or anything like that, but he's a capable backup. And then they do draft Kieran Amagaji, third-round pick out of Yale. Local guy from Hinsdale, Illinois, but traitsy, developmental, smart kid. Was an interesting pick because they have two tackles, and at that point it's like, don't you want to address the D-line a little bit? But they like him, obviously. Maybe he's a long-term guard. Maybe they don't want to pay Braxton Jones long-term and want a little bit more of a swing at upside. I don't know necessarily what their thinking was. He was in that range in terms of who he was as a prospect, though, so it's not like it was some reach. But not necessarily sure how he's going to play into the picture here, but they have time to figure that out. He's really not ready to play. So we'll see in the future. And then they did bring in a bunch of dudes that have played: Matt Pryor, Jake Kieran, Avante Collins. They're hoping that it doesn't come to that. But not horrible depth in terms of guys competing for the 9th and 10th spots on the offensive line. So again, a pretty good offensive line. They're ranked as my 18th overall unit, and they've done a really good job to raise the floor of this group. As we like to remind everybody, we're ranking these units, these teams, about as close to their floor as you're going to see, and 18th is pretty good there. I don't know that they have that much upside to be that much better than that. We've certainly talked about O-lines that have more high upside pieces that could raise them up to be like great offensive lines. I don't really feel that way about the Bears, but with some of the depth and the lack of like a turnstile weak link at this point, I think they should be pretty solid and certainly allow Caleb to do what he wants to do and tap into these weapons. So overall, I have the Bears coming out as the 19th overall offense, 16th in passing game, 25th in run game. But I do think you can certainly say there is more upside to be found with the total offense, even if I don't think the O-line has crazy upside. But, quarterback ranking just 22nd in terms of the passing grade there. Caleb could certainly outperform that, as we talked about. I think Shane Waldron can prove to be a better offensive coordinator than we're ranking them there. And if those two things come together, you're probably talking about a top 10 offense as early as this year. So the upside is certainly exciting, but ranking them at their floor as the 19th overall offense, that's pretty damn good too for a team with a rookie quarterback. But let's shift gears now and talk about Matt Eberflus's defense here. And there's certainly some good and some bad to talk about here. And Bears fans, you're going to get the bad news first before you get the good news. And the bad news is the defensive line is probably not going to be very good again. It's been a problem with this Bears team under the Matt Eberflus regime. And yes, I say that even with Montez Sweat here for a full year. Now, I recognize that the Montez Sweat addition was huge. And it certainly was a key reason that this Bears defense was able to look like a real boy in the NFL in the second half of the year last year. But for those watching on YouTube and not via the podcast version, I just love how this graphic worked out, where it's Montez Sweat kind of staring at all the other guys. Like, hey, can I get some help here? Because it still feels that way for the Bears. They came out ranking with a C- grade for the overall D-line, 28th to 30th. A little bit better with a C grade in pass rush, 25th to 29th. And then again towards the bottom for D-line run defense, 27th to 31st with a C- grade there. And we can start by praising Montez Sweat. This was a great addition. And even though I'm lower on this defensive line, I was kind of in the minority of right out the gate when they made that trade. I still remember I was walking through a Walmart and got like 5 texts from Bears fans like, hey, was this trade worth it? Seems like kind of an overpay. I go on Twitter and everyone's like, oh my God, they overpaid. They could have had Chase Young instead. And I was like, that's a great trade for the Bears. That is way better than anything they were going to find in the second round. And he just transformed this defense. Becomes the first player in the history of the NFL to lead 2 teams in sacks. That's wild. And the fact that he led the Bears in sacks despite only playing 36% of the snaps, I think tells you everything else you need to know about this Bears defensive line and why they still rank pretty low. But needless to say, my criticisms of this Bears defensive line have nothing to do with Montez Sweat. I do think he can be a 1. He would be a low-end 1, but I think he can be a 1, a 65 pressure, 12-plus sack type of guy, year in, year out. I like him to give you that. His length, his power, his effort. He's a 3-down player. He defends the run extremely well. He's got great size. He, for the most part, is going to beat you with the bull rush. He's going to beat you with his speed. I mean, he's got a great get-off. He's got the ability to threaten the edge. If you give it to him, he will take it and just run around you and go get a sack. But then he will occasionally beat you with an inside swipe as well. So he doesn't have like this massive bag of tricks, right? But he has enough. And over the last few years, he's been able to really figure out his pass rush style, what works for him, and how to be consistent with it. So you love that. But Jesus, man, the next best guy on this defensive line is DeMarcus Walker, who wouldn't start for 24 teams in the league, if not more. And he played pretty well last year. 10% pressure rate, which is like usually that's like the baseline for, okay, this guy can play in the NFL. He could be a good rotational player for you. So he had 475 pass rush snaps, which is a lot, 25th in the NFL. And to put a little more context on that, the only guys with less pressures than him on that many pass rush snaps were Arden Key, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Mike Dana. So you can kind of see how the inefficiency is there for him. He can win. He's got length. He's got get off. He's got power. He has some good wins. He had some good games out there. And he can hold up okay against the run as well. So he would be the perfect third edge piece. If you had a legit number 2 here opposite of Montez Sweat, and then you had DeMarcus Walker, who can be kind of that hybrid piece, play a little 3-tech on rush downs, a little big-bodied edge on early downs, that'd be perfect. But they have him really asked to be a true starter, so it's not the ideal role for him, and certainly not someone you're really worried about consistently beating you one-on-one. Let's stick with the edge group. I do like the Jacob Martin signing. He should be better than Yannick Ngakoue as an undersized edge that's not really an asset against the run, but can provide a little bit of juice and third down pass rushing ability. Look, I like the signing. He is what he is, though. He's a rotational backup type, which is better than Yannick Ngakoue played last year. So I do like the signing, but it's not going to really elevate them or help them here. And then you've got your developmental types. You got Dominique Robinson heading into year 3, has done nothing to this point, was a traits-based third-round pick that to this point has been a whiff. And then you got Austin Booker, which, to be fair, I really like this pick in the 5th round. And if anybody has a chance to emerge as a number 2 in this group opposite of Montez Sweat, it's Austin Booker. But he's incredibly young. He should be really inconsistent. He's a little light in terms of defending the run on early downs. But what I liked about Austin Booker was that he has a bunch of pass rush moves. For a dude that's played like 500 snaps in his college career, was a really big surprise when he declared, because Minnesota didn't play him for 2 years. He transferred to Kansas, got out there for about half of their snaps, and then he declared pro. And then the weird thing is he didn't actually test all that well. Actually tested really poorly. That's why he fell to the 5th round. But he had much better tape than a 5th round pick. And they traded back into this draft to get him. So I do like him as a pick, and I'm giving him a chance, more than a chance. I want to see a lot of him if I'm the Bears this year. But he is really your only hope at any sort of number 2, and he's a long way from that. And then you have Khalid Kareem, who might get some early down run defense work because the other 3 guys we just named, Booker, Robinson, and Martin, can't really defend the run. So I think he probably makes the team to do some of that dirty work. But that's it. That's your edge group. It shows you how essential the Montez Sweat trade was, and it shows you how bad this group is other than him. And it really isn't much better with the interior of the defensive line. And with DJ Jones leaving, it's actually sad that Jones is looking like a pretty big loss for the Bears. I don't know if they wanted him back and they just didn't know that the Cardinals were going to pay him $30 million. But even like average NFL starters can be hard to find at this position group. It's a very thin position in the league right now. And now they are really counting on a year 2 second-round pick, Gervon Dexter, to take a massive leap. And I think he's capable of it. But he is, in my mind, without a doubt, the biggest X-factor wild card piece on this entire team. Because he has upside. He has a chance to be the number 2 guy that we've been talking about that they need opposite of Montez Sweat. Essentially someone else that opposing offensive lines have to worry about beating you one-on-one consistently. He's a great athlete. He's got all the size, all the power that you look for. He even has the occasional, pass rush move. He can even beat you with a little quickness and finesse. There's a swim move on film that he can win with. But right now, that's not who he is. He was a raw player coming out of Florida. And in year 1, you saw the flashes, but he was not the consistent guy that you have any grounds for saying that he's going to be a 2 this year. That is a complete leap of faith that the Bears are making right now. Because right now, he is at best a 4, where if the other 3 pieces were really good and you're just kind of letting him be an afterthought and do his thing and develop, that's fine. But to count on him as your number 2, that's a crazy jump in expectations for him. So there's a lot of pressure on him to be a guy up front. And look, I like Gervon Dexter. I like that pick when they made him, and I even believe in him. But, man, it's just a massive leap for a guy that had 29 pressures and 4 sacks in his rookie season on 300 snaps. And the one thing to really look for with him is what we talked about with him coming out of Florida was he was one of the most unique prospects where, as we described, a lot of stuff really comes together for him. He's kind of the complete package, but he had the most bizarre, slow first step I've ever seen. My analysis on him coming out was he played football as if nobody ever told him he's supposed to go when the football is snapped. It was wild. And Mike Renner actually made that exact same point after watching his film, independently of either of us talking about that. So, I'm not the only person that saw the same thing. And then I would say in his rookie tape, it was a little better. But there were still flashes where, the ball is snapped and he's the only guy not moving. So there's still, something needs to get brought up to speed there. But it certainly was better. And the role they asked him to play as a little bit more of a penetrator helped as well. So if that continues to grow, that could click, and that could be what you look for to be all right, he made that giant leap, and he's getting you 55 pressures within this season. It's in the realm of possibilities, but I would put it at 20% that can happen. I would say the most absolute likely scenario is he's about what DJ Jones was for you last year, which is an inconsistent guy that can shed some blocks against the run, but also has some frustrating moments against the run, and a guy that can have some splash plays as a pass rusher, but also not doing too much consistently for you. I think he could be a little bit better than what DJ Jones was as a rusher last year. And sorry, it's Justin Jones, not DJ Jones. I don't know how many times I've said DJ, but Justin Jones is who we're talking about. My apologies, Bears fan, but you get the point. A lot of pressure to be put on this young man, and he is the biggest swing factor for this Bears defense, and maybe even you could go as far as saying, outside of obviously how well Caleb plays, but maybe the biggest factor in terms of can this Bears team be a playoff team this year? There is that much pressure on this young man unless the Bears go out and sign someone. especially when there is really not much else after that. You do have Andrew Billings, who's a nice nose tackle. I like him on early downs, and he can even generate some rush on pass rush downs as well. But the thing with him is his stamina is really low. He's been beat up throughout his career. He just can't play that many snaps. So he's a nice player, but he will rotate as a starter, and he's going to have to rotate with Zach Pickens as a part-time starter for this. And that's really bad, man. I mean, that's a difference-making liability for this team, is the fact that they have to play Zach Pickens significant time, and they're probably going to give him that because they spent a third-round pick on him. Now, could the light come on in year 2? Maybe. I mean, he's an athletic penetrator that they asked a lot of in run defense in his rookie year, and they're going to continue to ask a lot in terms of run defense that I just don't think he's really capable of. He reminds me a lot of like Jerry Tillery or even like Javon Kinlaw coming out of South Carolina, where he's got a good first step. He's a good athlete, has some traits, but just doesn't have it against the run. So it's weird that they drafted him and they were like, you're our run defending D tackle. I'm like, what kind of film did you guys watch? Because that's not the type of prospect he was at all. But yeah, man, I mean, talk about putting too much on a young player that they just haven't shown they can do that. We talked about that with Dexter. It's probably even worse with Zach Pickens. I mean, he should be in the Austin Booker slot in terms of like, okay, you might start off the season getting a few snaps here or there to show us what you can do. No, Zach Pickens is like a quasi-starter for this interior group. And maybe they can sign some guys, but at this point in time, that's not the case, right? So the fact that he's getting significant time is going to drive this thing down. You can like the starters as much as you want, and I don't think you can like them that much, but you have to remember, this is a player right now, Zach Pickens, that's probably slated to get about 50% of their snaps. Would love to see the Bears sign some sort of veteran that can give you a better floor there. I think that would at least raise the D-line run defense up to a C grade and help the group a little bit. Because right now, again, it's at a C minus. And then what's crazy is they have literally nothing after that. Michael Dwumfor has not played in the league. He's undersized. Byron Cowart was an athletic, draft and stash piece for the Patriots. He's bounced around, has done nothing. They bring in the local kid, Keith Randolph. I wanted to like him as I watched him next to Johnny Newton. I didn't. Undersized guy, not a playmaker, not an athlete. I didn't watch Mallory. But yeah, it's a brutal interior defensive line, and certainly in the conversation for the worst interior defensive line in the league. So that is how you end up close to the worst overall D-line in the league. Essentially, Montez Sweat and nothing else is enough to elevate this to all the way up to 28th to 30th for overall defensive line. But I do think this is the group that you look at the Bears offseason, investing in Caleb Williams and making sure he has everything he needs to succeed on that side of the ball. It might be an offseason ahead of finally addressing this defensive line. And obviously, you're hoping a lot. You're hoping as well for a lot from Gervon Dexter, and that's just going to be wait and see. But it does get better as you go on, because this front office did invest in linebacker big time, and they have a very good linebacker room for whatever that's worth, especially in terms of run defense, where they are actually tied with 4 other teams for first in linebacker run defense. And then more in that middle cluster in the league in terms of just solid coverage units for the linebackers, 12th to 20th. Overall, though, they come in with a B-plus grade, 5th overall for linebacker. So a lot of respect heading towards the Bears for their linebackers. Tale as old as time. Feels like the Bears aren't the Bears without a good linebacking core, and here we are again. You got Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards and Jack Sanborn, who would probably start for a handful of teams in the league. But your 2 true starters, Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. Honestly, TJ Edwards is the better player. I even said it when they paid Edmonds all that money and then got TJ Edwards for cheaper. I was like, man, they might have gotten the better player for cheaper here, and that's exactly what we saw. TJ Edwards had a career year. He actually played so well that he made Tremaine Edmonds kind of an afterthought for Bears fans. And really, anyone that's watched these guys tape over the last 3 years, that's not a huge surprise. It's just all comes down to draft capital and athletic upside in terms of why the price gap was so wide. Because Edmonds he's basically Brian Urlacher in terms of length and athleticism. a former first-round pick that the Bills didn't want to pay because he wasn't all that good. And then TJ Edwards was like undrafted out of Wisconsin with no physical traits at all, but one of the best, smartest, most physical linebackers in the game. So it's actually Edwards that really contributes to this high ranking for the Bears with this linebacker room. He is, to me, one of the best run defending linebackers in the league. His run diagnostics are elite. His effort is elite. He still plays like that undrafted free agent that has everything to prove. And, I think he's out to prove that he deserves one top of the market linebacker contract in there at some point, because he has been pretty close to a top 10 linebacker in the league for the last 3 years. He's just been battling against that undrafted stamp that he has had to overcome. And him at $6.5 million a year is a wild, wild bargain. Kind of reminds me of what we talked about with the Vikings edge rushers in the last deep dive, where it's like, well, I kind of think Grenard was an overpay, but Van Ginkel was an underpay. You put those two guys together on free agent contracts in the same year together, and it's like, well, it kind of comes out as a fairly paid group, and that feels the same way with the Bears. If you split the difference here and Edwards was 11 and Edmonds was 11, or maybe if you wanted it to be fair, you just flip their contracts, period. Edwards gets 16 and Edmonds gets 6. But the end result for the Bears, of course, is a really good duo. But what's cool about Edwards, too, is he's not just that see-ball, smash-ball, throwback Big Ten linebacker that you might think he is. He's actually a really productive coverage player. 4 pass breakups, 3 interceptions last year, 8 pass breakups, which was good for second the year before, actually behind Tremaine Edmonds, who was first in 2022 in a complete outlier of a season right before he got paid. He went right back to being the average guy he'd been throughout his career after that. But yeah, Edwards has actually gotten his hands on just about as many footballs in coverage as any linebacker in the league. And that's like Roquan and Fred Warner included. Now, he gives up more because he doesn't have that hip fluidity to kind of turn and run with a deep cross behind him. He doesn't have the range. So you can get him in coverage a little bit, but he definitely makes up for it with his anticipation and kind of ball skills on the back end. So he is a 3-down player, even if he isn't that great athlete you typically think of as a coverage linebacker, and certainly one of the most underpaid players in the league right now. And then, again, his running mate Edmonds might be the most overpaid player in the league. In a dream scenario, we just mentioned it, but in a dream scenario, you could get that 2022 version of Tremaine Edmonds where his length and his speed and coverage showed up all over the field. He led the league in pass breakups. But to contextualize that, the 10 pass breakups he had in 2022 is as many as he's had in last year and the 3 years before that combined. Now, yeah, he had 4 interceptions land in his lap last year, but he was not the coverage impact that they were hoping to get when they signed him. He's still only 26 years old. You could argue the arrow could be pointing up on him, but to me, he is what he is at this point. He is an athlete that will athlete his way into plays at times, but is way behind the curve in terms of the mental processing at the position, especially against the run too, where he is very late to his keys. He takes bad angles. He does miss a lot of tackles. He really relies on that elite athleticism that he does have. He's a great player to have in Madden, right? A 6'5" dude that can move like this. You love to use that guy. But unfortunately, on the real football field, he just doesn't navigate himself into playmaking opportunities consistently enough. But that athleticism does raise his floor, and he's not a horrible player. So you put an average linebacker like Tremaine Edmonds next to a top 10 guy like TJ Edwards, and you do get a really good room. And they do rank really high because there's just not a lot of great linebacker rooms in the league right now. But also the reason they're a B+ grade in run defense and not a B grade is Jack Sanborn, who, let's face it, he is just TJ Edwards that hasn't proven to be TJ Edwards yet. Both almost identical players coming out of Wisconsin, where They go undrafted because their measurables suck, right? No athleticism to write home about at all. But his tape was so good at Wisconsin, just like TJ Edwards was. Gets to the league. Turns out you're really good at your run keys. You can navigate to the right place at the right time, and you play with your hair on fire. You can play linebacker in the NFL. And one of these days, Jack Sanborn is going to emerge as a starter in the league. Hell, that might be in Chicago someday. If they get outpriced by TJ Edwards when he does get that big deal, or if they cut ties with Tremaine Edmonds and think he's too expensive, I do think Jack Sanborn can start and be something like TJ Edwards. He's not nearly as proven in terms of the coverage feel that we described with TJ Edwards, and not as proven as a run defender because he doesn't have the total snaps. But on a per-snap basis, he's a monster against the run, and he actually makes up for some of their deficiencies up front because he can actually get off blocks and provide some problems as a run defender. So he's a really good football player that they're able to kind of stash and sneak onto the field for some impactful run defense plays. And it's not too often that an LB3 elevates a linebacker grade like that, but he does matter for this Bears team. And I don't have confirmation on this, but just by eyeballing it, it does look like the Bears led the league in 3 linebacker packages last year. Sanborn played 412 snaps last year. It's about 40% of their snaps. So that's a lot for an LB3. Granted, Edmonds missed 3 games and Edwards missed a game. So there's a little bit of him coming in as a starter in a backup role. But even outside of those games, he's playing anywhere from 12 to 20 snaps a game on average, which is a lot, especially by today's standards for a third linebacker. But beyond that, you got Noah Sewell, was a day 3 pick last year, kind of in the same category of Edwards and Sanborn, where they're not great athletes, but they play with their hair on fire, and smart, physical, bigger linebackers. Kind of the same story, just very much unproven and hasn't really played here. Did grade out well in like the 30 snaps that he did play in his rookie year, though. Technically speaking, had the second highest PFF grade on the team on defense at 86.5 on 27 snaps. So it could be something there. They've got a type there, and it's worked for them. And then Amen Agbangbemiga in year 3, I believe, an athlete out of Missouri, still working on things, but gives you a little more juice for special teams. And hell, even Micah Baskerville, another kind of lacks size, lacks athleticism, but they like what they see in him. So clearly they for the most part, have a type. But yeah, it's a good linebacker group that, especially in the run game, actually elevates this defense. And then more middle of the road in terms of the coverage. But then let's get to the secondary, and Bears fans, you get to end on a good note for the roster breakdown. It's a really good unit. They come in ranking 6th to 9th in the NFL, so top 10 secondary here for the Bears. And I think as we look to this year, I think this group has, at this point, mostly reached their upside, with the exception of year 2 corner Tyreek Stevenson. But let's start with their CB1 in Jalen Johnson, who, good work by the Bears front office to get him back. He was really pushing and threatening towards free agency there. And they did a good job to get him back. And I mean, when Jalen Johnson has played, he's been a top 10 corner in the NFL. And I give him an 85 grade as a corner. And by the way, for those following the series, I caved. We're going to go with overall grades for the secondary. A lot of you will be rejoicing. So for corners, that overall grade is their coverage grade. As we've shown in the years past, it's almost always going to be the same. You might get a slight bump for like elite run defenders in the slot. Might go from a 77 to a 78 if they've got like an A+ run defense grade. But then for the safeties, as we started to show last episode with the Vikings, we're going to have both run defense and coverage combining for an overall for the safeties. Just a note for those diligently following the series. But yeah, Jalen Johnson gets an 85 grade for me. And you could even argue that the arrow should be pointing up on him. I'm not quite going to go that far because I think this is a really good spot for him and his skill set. But I also wouldn't rule out that he outperforms this and continues to climb the cornerback rankings. But I think he's right inside that top 10 corner conversation for sure. And really the big knock on him is durability. He misses seemingly 4 or 5 games a year. And I think that was baked into the fact that it took so long for them to get a deal done. They had to kind of account for the fact that he just has missed a lot of time and probably will continue to miss a few games every year. And when his contract came in, people were like, that's not enough for Jalen Johnson. About 19 per year, which is about 4 or 5 mil a year less than the top of the market at corner. But I do think the fact that they're anticipating he might miss some time is baked into that. But beyond that, I mean, you've got a big, physical, super smart corner with enough speed to play at a super high level in the NFL. And Matty Eberflus loves his zone defense. It's been no problem for Jalen Johnson. He played a ton of cover 3 at Utah, and he is just that smart, instinctive corner that can play well with his eyes on the quarterback to read out route combinations and take his risks without blowing coverage and all that stuff. But he's also really good playing physical, tight coverage down the boundary. So that can be press, bump and run, cover 3, man-to-man. Where you might see him get burnt a little bit more is if he has to follow a guy over the middle of the field and hang on some of the more like speedy or quick wide receivers. That's where he's not an elite athlete. But they also do a really good job within Eberflus's system making sure he's not exposed that way. So he's awesome, well worth the money. Even if you can bake in 4 or 5 missed games a year, you definitely, if you're the Bears, you definitely want to be a team that has good cornerback depth. And as we'll talk about in a minute, they've done that with a guy like Terrell Smith. But let's talk about CB2, Tyreek Stevenson, the one guy in this group that I really think you could say the arrow is pointing up on. I loved Tyreek Stevenson. I hated Tyreek Stevenson as a Packers fan that the Bears got him in the second round because I thought he could have snuck into the end of the first round for cornerback needy teams. So for them to get him was a huge steal, and he played like it as a rookie. Looked every bit the part that you could ask for from a second round rookie corner, certainly, but even like if he was a first round pick, I think he would have played up to his expectations in that regard. I think he's a guy that can go bump and run. He's got good press coverage. He's got good enough speed. Plenty of size. But the question with him coming out of Miami was zone coverage. Didn't play a lot of it at Miami. And, just had some coverage busts, had some learning to be had in terms of knowing his rules, when to take risks, all that stuff. And in his rookie season, that showed up as a weakness. And fortunately, I think you did see him get much more comfortable playing all the zone that he did for Matt Eberflus here as the year went on. Now, still, a lot of his coverage losses did come in zone, but for every one of those, you saw him making plays from zone with his eyes on the quarterback. Some really exciting interceptions doing that kind of stuff. But really not on his draft profile was, ball hawk playmaker from zone. A lot of other good stuff was, but that was kind of missing. So the fact that it's in there is really exciting, especially as a CB2. Like, even if he does bust some coverages from time to time, you kind of live with that if he's a playmaker. But I think as a rookie, that's only going to get better, right? It should only get better. And man, you could argue, his upside is every bit what Jalen Johnson is, if not more, because I think he's a better press man, bump and run corner, at least in terms of someone that could actually follow around true number 1 wide receivers and play man coverage from a variety of alignments. I think Stevenson's got a little bit more of that in his bag. So I really like Stevenson. He's still dealing with some inconsistencies, so you don't know necessarily how much of that you're going to get here in year 2. But if he starts to really clean that stuff up, he has a lot of potential. And this duo has a lot of potential to be like a premium duo in the league that we talk about as one of those groups. But we'll see how big of a step forward Stevenson can take from a consistency standpoint in year 2. And then Kyler Gordon, you could say, oh, it's year 3. The arrow should be pointing up on him. To me, he was a really high floor prospect coming out. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the fastest guy. But he's quick. He's smart. Plays physical, but not the most consistent tackler or run defender. But I definitely felt like he was a high floor guy that should be able to step in the slot and be about a top 10 slot corner in the league within his first couple of years, and that's kind of exactly what we've gotten. I don't think we've seen the lockdown coverage consistency to say he's going to be a ton more than that. and I don't know that he has the traits to be a ton more than that. So I'm not going to put the up arrow on him, but you're still happy that he's kind of settled in at his upside here heading into year 3 as a really reliable slot corner that this team can hang their hat on. So that is an exciting cornerback trio. But then we hinted at Terrell Smith. He's an exciting fourth corner to have because he's got a lot of traits. Was in a really deep cornerback class. They took him in the 4th round, and when he played last year, he absolutely looked the part. And what you love about this is he's got a very similar skill set to Jalen Johnson. Played a lot of zone at Minnesota. He's got that kind of big-bodied profile, can run up and down the sideline with some bigger wide receivers. If you're looking for the guy that, like, all right, you're in 5 weeks a year when Jalen can't go, Terrell Smith could be perfect in that role. He has upside to become more than that, but they don't need him to be more than that. So he's a really nice piece to have there, and who knows, he could ascend to being a starter in the league someday, whether that's here or somewhere else. And then they really have 3 other guys that have played. Both Jalen Jones and Greg Stroman got on the field last year and did okay for what they are as backups, as 5th and 6th corners. You like that. Greg Stroman's actually a pretty nice slot corner when he's played in the league. He just hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities, but I like having him here. Blackwell played in 2022, not quite as much in 2023. Not sure if he'll make the team, but yeah, love the depth. Some of the better cornerback depth that we've talked about in this series, at least so far. And then the safety room is good. You bring in Kevin Byard. Hard to know exactly what Byard is. He is a 31-year-old safety whose playmaking abilities have really fallen off over the last couple of years. You know, the Titans were willing to kind of just get younger and move on from him. They definitely didn't see him as a game-changing guy in their secondary. The Eagles ended up cutting him because they didn't think he was worth $11 million or whatever it was, which isn't that much, right? Like, some of these safeties were getting ridiculous money in free agency, and the Eagles even thought Byard was expensive then. So the last 2 teams that had him didn't really think he was an impact player. You look at his film the last couple of years, he's been solid. He hasn't given up a ton in coverage and has been a very stable run defender, but you know, his days as a top 3 to 5 safety in the NFL are pretty clearly behind him at this point, and he does seem to be heading in the wrong direction there. It does happen when you're 31 years old and you've got almost 10,000 career snaps. It's okay. But they did give him a 2-year contract and decent money, and they're hoping, I think, for more consistency from this position. Eddie Jackson just had too many coverage busts, too many missed tackles. Not as much of a 3-down player as they think they're going to get from Kevin Byard. So I do think they can get that from him, especially in the tackling department where there has been no fall off on Kevin Byard. I mean, he has, say what you want about PFF grades, but their tackling grades are very good because they're very easy for them to make. It's just how consistent are you coming through on your tackle attempts? And Kevin Byard has had 6 straight seasons with pretty much elite tackle grade numbers. Even last year, 6% missed tackle percentage is excellent for a safety. Anything under 10 for a safety is really good. So, it is a little bit harder to know exactly what you're getting from Kevin Byard. And down the stretch for the Eagles, he was kind of a problem. There was that Cardinals game where they were running all over, and he really struggled to take the right angles. So that's when you look at a guy that's always been such a good run defender, see a game against the Cardinals, and he's late in the season taking bad angles. You know it's not a mental thing for Kevin Byard. That's when you worry that he's slowing down, and then really struggled to tackle in that playoff game against the Bucs, where you remember the Eagles were just tripping over themselves. Kevin Byard was one of those guys. So there was some ugly games down the stretch. He's heading in the wrong direction. It's hard to know exactly what you're getting from Kevin Byard, but I still think it was a good signing to kind of see what you can get from him at 31 years old, and I think they can get pretty solid play there. And then Jaquan Brisker as well. Kind of similar story to Kyler Gordon, where I feel like he has kind of settled in at his upside. He's not this sensational athlete. I never viewed him as this like crazy great coverage player, just because he's a little bigger, he's a little stiffer. He's kind of that bigger, strong safety type of guy where he doesn't have a ton of range to be a playmaker on single high. I like him manned up against tight ends, but if you get him matched up on a slot corner, he can get shaken man-to-man or shaken in zone match. So he's been an up-and-down coverage player in his first couple of years. That was kind of expected, but he's really settled in as a consistent tackler and a really good run defender. He's a good starting caliber safety. Until I see a reason to believe he's going to be more than that, I'm not going to put the up arrow on him. I think anytime you see a young player that doesn't get the up arrow in this series, some fans can be like, you hate that guy. I'm like, no, I don't hate the guy. It's just, I think he was a high floor prospect that has reached his upside here in year 3, and that's a success. Most day 2 rookies or day 2 picks don't reach their upside in their rookie contract, or certainly prove that their floor was as good as you hoped it would be. Now, the safety depth certainly isn't what the cornerback depth is. There's really nobody I love stepping in. Jonathan Owens has been okay for the Packers. Fun guy to have in the locker room on the team. He's Simone Biles' husband. But yeah, his play on the field has been very up and down. And then you got a couple of young guys that haven't proven much. Elijah Hicks, Quindell Johnson, 7th round pick for Hicks, a undrafted free agent for Quindell Johnson. And then you have some more veterans that have played in the league, Tavares Moore and Adrian Colbert, but no one you would really count on there. So you do got to keep those safeties healthy. Otherwise, you'd be a little worried about who's stepping in. I do think Greg Stroman could play some safety for them, though, with how much time he's spent in the league as a slot corner. So keep an eye on that if you did get an injury. But yeah, overall, really nice secondary. Again, they come inside the top 10, ranking in that B tier, coming in 6th to 9th. And then they get a B grade as well in that big cluster in the middle of the league, 7th to 23rd for DB run support. Couple of really good safeties against the run. And then the 3 corners, we didn't really mention it. They're just kind of okay against the run. Nothing special, but nothing you're worried about. But as far as the defense overall, they did come out 20th for me for overall defense, 19th in pass defense, 14th in run defense. I know they finished more towards the top 10 in the second half of last year, but overall I am still worried about that pass rush and what it can mean for the full course of this season. I am ultimately a pass rush over coverage guy. Pass rush does carry a bigger weight in these rankings and in my formula for this series, but it's still a testament to the secondary and the defensive coaching that they do come in close to the middle of the league for defense, despite having one of the worst pass rushes in the league. And maybe they do surprise. Maybe you get that big jump from Gervon Dexter in year 2. But we kind of broke that down as being such a big wild card. Unless they sign someone, make another trade, or Gervon Dexter makes that big leap, I actually don't know that this team has crazy upside on defense outside of some miraculous coaching job from Matt Eberflus, which I guess isn't out of the realm of possibilities. But as you look at the team overall, I mean, even if this is their floor, which we're ranking these teams at their floor, as I've said, if they're the 20th defense and then some of that offensive upside comes through with Caleb and company, if they're a top 10 offense and the 20th defense or maybe the 17th defense, that can absolutely be a playoff team, which I think a lot of Bears fans are kind of quietly expecting, but would certainly be thrilled with that outcome, regardless of how many playoff games they win. Now, we do got to talk special teams a little bit. So they didn't come out too high in my special teams formula, kind of taking all these objective metrics, the PFF team grade from last year, the DVOA team grade from last year, a 2-year moving average on the kicker, which uniquely hurts the Bears because Cairo Santos was phenomenal last year, but brutal 2 years ago. So that's kind of your big question there, honestly, is what Cairo Santos do you get? I don't know that they can simply count on last year's version. We do see a lot of kickers kind of fluctuate year to year, so we'll monitor that. The punter grade is a rookie grade, so it comes in 25th on Torrey Taylor, but this was the rare punter that I was actually familiar with. I did watch a lot of Iowa football, unfortunately for my eyeballs, but the best offensive player on that team was Torrey Taylor. They spent a 4th-round pick on him. They think he's going to be pretty damn good, and there's plenty of reason to believe that he could be pretty damn good and be a contributor towards them being a little bit better than 23rd in special teams. So you do have some question marks there. I don't want to just dismiss them. Rookie punter and a potentially shaky kicker, depending which version you get on him. Maybe call it a little bit polarizing for the special teams this year for the Bears. But let's recap their strengths and weaknesses before we look at the schedule and then get to the interview with EJ, which, again, you guys are not going to want to miss. But we're going to keep this new Venn diagram graphic. A lot of you guys said in the comments in the Vikings video that you like the change here. So the strengths for the Bears, definitely their weaponry offensively, and then defensively with the defensive coaching, the secondary, and linebackers. Those are all true strengths for me for this Bears team. But the weaknesses, I am going to say defensive line, man, barring some massive surprise from Gervon Dexter. Even if you have Montez Sweat, you slide towards him, provide some chip help, leave everybody else one-on-one. You're pretty much Gucci against the Bears, and they just need a little more than that, man. And I think even Matt Eberflus would tell you that. But then you look at the yellow in the middle there, the pivotal factors for this team. Obviously, Caleb Williams. I didn't put it as a weakness because I do think his floor is pretty high. But a pivotal factor in the sense of, like, could he be a top 10 quarterback this year? If you get that range of outcomes on him, and that's a true strength for this team is kind of cooking with gas. And then the offensive coaching as well, to me, essentially you're going to need a better effort than what Shane Waldron gave the Seahawks last year. I think there is a certain upside with Waldron. We've seen some highs, but we've seen some lows. So that's probably the biggest range of outcomes is, do you have the right offensive coordinator here with this rookie quarterback to make this thing look good? Bears have struggled for a long time to get that position of offensive coordinator right. So definitely got to list that as a pivotal factor. And then I'll just reiterate, Gervon Dexter, if he hits, if he has this massive year two, which I do think is in the range of possibilities, even if it's unlikely, you might wipe that defensive line off the board at least as a weakness, and it's more of an average unit. And then, man, you're looking at a football team that doesn't have any true weaknesses, which is really exciting for the Bears. But let's take a look at the schedule now, as well as their kind of lines in terms of the gambling odds from the people in the desert. So the Bears have a pretty hefty over-under, 8.5. That is the highest we've seen in this series so far. They're also pretty close in terms of Super Bowl odds to where we have them ranked here. They come in tied for 18th, 40-1. What is eye-opening to me is the division odds at plus 330. To put that in context, the Vikings are at plus 900, who we just did the Vikings at 20. That's basically saying if they played this season out 100 times, the Bears would win this division a third of the time. I do think that's a little crazy. So to me, that number specifically is Bears fans hammering legal gambling in Illinois and inflating those odds a little bit. So if I'm taking any of these, it'd be the over-under or the Super Bowl odds, not those division odds. But you look at the schedule, and I don't know if I would say it's a super hard schedule. I certainly wouldn't say it's an easy schedule. I think the start to their season could be worse. There's some tough games in there, though. I love getting to start everything off with Tennessee at home. Not the best pass rush. You get it at home, a lot of hype. They should be pretty big favorites in that game. But then you do got to go to Houston. You got to go to Indianapolis. Hopefully you could split those and then split again with the Rams and the Panthers. So you maybe start 3-2, get a little good vibes going. Then you got to go to London against the Jags, which are a good team. So there's worse ways to start your season, but there are some good games in there, some good teams in there. You get your bye week, and then those next 3 games off the bye are going to be really important for the Bears. At Washington, they're obviously going to be, the better team in that game, but on the road. At Arizona, not easy, but winnable. And then New England at home. They should be big favorites in that one as well. But then it does really get tough down the stretch. Their mettle is going to be tested if you start to get some playoff hopes. If they're sitting there with 6 wins or so with a couple of months to play, you've got all of your division games in a really good division, what could be the best division in football this year. There's a chance at that. You have all of those games in the final 8 weeks of the season. And then your 2 non-division games are at San Francisco and Seattle at home. Another tough game. So don't count your chickens before they hatch if you have the Vegas over-under of 8.5. I think after that New England game, week 10, they might be a 5 or 6 win team, and you're thinking this thing's pretty safe, but it does get tough. So Bears fans, I know you're excited. I would wait probably till at least Green Bay week 11 to see if you win that before you start getting cocky. I think it's a good line at 8.5. My projection had him at 7.9, more of an 8-win team. But I'm also not ready to bet against Caleb Williams. I think he's a special quarterback. And like I said earlier, like this is the first time as a Packers fan that I've been legitimately afraid of the Chicago Bears. So if you want to, I think they win 8, but if you think they go 9 or 10 and you want to bet on it, I wouldn't tell you no. I do think there's better value bets out there, but this is a fun one. They're going to be a fun team to bet on and a fun team to watch. So with that, let's turn it over to EJ Snyder for the interview to continue this fun conversation about the Chicago Bears. And now we get to welcome EJ Snyder back to the channel here. EJ, of course, over at the Bootleg Football Podcast, him and Brett putting together their own kind of summer team preview series that I love to follow along with what you guys are doing, because I like to think that, like, and I get a lot of comments that are like, between you and Bootleg, we got like the full package here. And I just want to reiterate, everybody, you got to go check out the team series that they're doing on Bootleg, because it really goes hand in hand, I think, with a lot of the stuff we talk about. You guys come at it from a different kind of approach, and I think it all kind of comes out on the opposite end with a really good combo platter there. But thanks for coming on, EJ. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's fun to be back. I think this is the 3rd year in a row we've done this,
Year
and
3.
it's always fun to talk about teams at this time of year. Hope springs eternal, I think, for all 32 fan bases. So it's a hopeful and ambitious time of year. It makes for great conversation.
Absolutely. So Caleb Williams is a Bear. I don't know if anybody listening had heard about this yet, but
I don't know. It's weird.
Lot of hype coming into the year with Caleb, and I think a lot of it's justified, but I wanted to have kind of a nuanced conversation with you, EJ, and kind of get your own expectations on what you think Caleb's going to look like this year. But looking at it again from a more nuanced approach, looking at sort of like a distribution curve of possible outcomes, if you will. So this will turn into a 3-part question, but let's start by looking at your expectations for Caleb Williams in what would be the kind of middle of the curve, or in other words, if they played this season 100 times, what is the outcome for Caleb's rookie season that you think we would see most of the time?
Yeah, I love this approach to the question, because I think all things are in curves, all things are on a spectrum, and this is a great way to talk about the edges and talk about the middle. If we're talking about the middle, I love the idea of playing it 100 times and just seeing where the marbles fall. I think my expectation is probably about 3,500 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 8 picks. That would be a good, solid starting point. Again, first year in the NFL, every rookie has to adjust. I don't care how good they are or how good their supporting cast is. We'll talk a lot about that today. New offensive coordinator that he has to mesh with, and Shane Waldron. And if he managed 3,500, 23 and 8, I think the Bears would be pretty successful. And I think that is a very solid platform. Again, if you look at the distribution of all the NFL quarterbacks, that would put him in the top half pretty solidly. And I think that's a fair place to think about him ending up his rookie year. I think the Bears would be happy with that and still have room to grow into year 2.
Yeah. So the next question there is, okay, what about the upside of things here? What if things go really well? All of this crazy hype that people are talking about with Caleb, what if some of that hits? And I wanted to throw out maybe the top 2 or 3% where he's just Patrick Mahomes, right? Because I think there's maybe a 1 or 2% chance that he really is just that good. But again, pretty unlikely. But what about like the 90% range? Like, okay, this probably isn't a likely outcome, but it's in there, and we could see this.
Yeah, lightning in a bottle result, CJ Stroud like from last year, which is the best rookie performance we've seen by a quarterback. I would say 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, 6 picks. That would be an exceptional result. Now, everybody's focused on the 4,000 yard number because Chicago's never had a 4,000 yard passer. I don't know if you've heard that. I mean, tune in to pretty much any show where they mention the Bears and they're going to bring it up.
Who,
So
me as a Packers
everybody,
fan? Why would I be aware of that hilarious stat?
no, you're probably really not aware of much quarterback debate at all because you've been sitting in the ivory tower for 30 years. So you have to deal with stuff like this. It's great. But that would be a tremendous result as a rookie. That would be everything hit. He picked up the offense just as quickly as everybody said he can, which I believe he can, but meshed with his new supporting cast, understood everything, stayed healthy. Offensive line was good, and just started that, mid-season roll of momentum of why not us, and continued it on. That would basically guarantee a playoff spot at that point.
hmm Yeah. All right. And then there's the third leg of kind of like, I want what you think a worst case scenario could be. Like, what is the genuine nightmare situation? How low could that go? Is it a Bryce Young rookie season? Is it a Trevor Lawrence rookie season? Just how bad do you think it could be given what you kind of watched with Caleb and know about the Bears this year?
Yeah, he's an exceptional player, and he had a not great offense last year at USC. That's putting it kindly. Anybody that is learning about offense that watched that attack last year at USC, it's even tough to call it an attack. Has
hmm
lots of negative things to say about that offense and his usage within it and everything else. And he definitely pressed because of that. If that were the case, if the offensive line fixes don't take, if injuries pile up, if he just doesn't mesh and he gets beat up early in the season, I think the low end, the absolute floor is probably about 3,100 yards, about 18 touchdowns. I can't see him throwing less than that because he will have 5 or 6 this year that just make your jaw hit the floor. He has the escapability, the arm talent, and basically the play creation skills that he's just going to manufacture some. Justin did the same thing. He
Yeah.
did it with his legs. Caleb's going to do it. He can do it with his legs as well, but he's going to do more of that with his arm. And there's going to be a handful when people are saying like, oh, 12 or 14 touchdowns. He's going to throw more than that just on the average curve, even if it's at the bottom. So I would say 3,100, 18, and about 10 interceptions. I don't see a whole lot more than that. Certainly they piled up last year. There are reasons for that, but I think he's going to be smarter with the ball. I hope the coaching staff is going to put him in a much better situation than he was in last year,
hmm
but 3,100, 18, and 10 would be, look, okay, there's lots of things to work on. It's not, baby with the bathwater moment, but it would be certainly disappointing after all the hype and the surrounding cast.
Yeah. Yeah, disappointing, but also like I agree with you that like that's like a really exciting floor for a rookie quarterback. Like
Yeah.
that's nowhere close to some of these crazy busts. And I do think the Bears have set him up really well. I even had a tweet like a few months ago that the Caleb Williams is walking into the number like the best spot a number one pick maybe ever has, at least in my life in the last 30 years or so.
Yeah,
So
since
it's
Dak,
cool.
really, when Dak walked in as a rookie, he had a tremendous offensive line. He
Yeah.
had prime Zeke.
I was just talking about
Uh,
number one
oh
picks,
yeah,
like
yeah.
number
In
one
terms of
overall
number
picks.
one
Yeah, yeah.
picks, it
Yeah.
stretches farther back pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yep. So it's an exciting floor, man, and it terrifies me as a Packers fan.
Good.
Um, yeah, finally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about this coaching staff. Obviously, defense is staying the same, but with the offensive coordinator, they decide to make the change, bring in Shane Waldron. What sort of changes are you expecting there? I guess there's two different ways you could look at it. Number one is like level of coaching. Just is he a better overall coach than Luke Getzey? And then what if any sort of like schematic changes do you think are going to apply to this version of the Bears this year compared to last year?
It's an interesting question. I got to watch Shane Waldron up close. He was the Seahawks OC. Seahawks are right up the road for me. I was at a couple of their games last year and, of course, watched a lot of them on tape. And early in the season, I think Shane Waldron pulled out a lot of really cool stuff. There was a bunch of
Mhm.
plays I sent to like Nate Tice, and I was like, look at this. Like, this is fun. They're not all working, but again, if they can refine some of this stuff, it's going to be really interesting. So I think Waldron will start hotter than Getzey did. Getzey's start with the offense was a deep thud. I think you'll remember that. And it never really got a lot better. There was like, wait, you had the whole off season and this is what you came up with. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for the Getsy thing. Don't love that. Also, thanks for Lucas Patrick. Don't love that either. I'm pretty sure they're both moles. They were sent to Chicago to destroy the offense.
Robert Tunyon.
Yeah, well, Tunyon just kind of, Tunyon played, he just didn't do a lot. Whereas Patrick was out
Yep.
there literally olaying guys like, hey, let's go. And then Getsy was
Go hit
complaining that,
Justin.
yeah. And Getsy was complaining that like the offense was fine, and sometimes it was, and that his implication was execution. Basically, the players aren't following my plan, so how can I get better? Good coaches will do that for about half a season or less. And then they'll say, okay, so my plan's not working with what we have, with the players we have here. I'm not getting the results I need to compete. How can I adjust? How can I patch the holes in the wall and make this work a little bit better? And I was really not impressed with the way Getsy did or did not flex in the second half of the season to try and adjust to what was obviously a dumpster fire. He just kind of held the line and said they need to get better. And that to me is not a sign of great coaching. You need to be more flexible than that. I will say this about Getsy. With him in Las Vegas this year, we will probably have a better idea of whether or not that offense works really well or whether or not, it just has to be player driven. Waldron was, again, a hotter start. I think we'll see that. We'll definitely see some creative formations. We'll see some really fun 3 tight end stuff that I love.
Yeah.
I think the run game is pretty well set up. We'll talk about why they acquired, who they acquired for that running back room. But the thing with Waldron was down the stretch, the knock against him, because nobody's perfect, is he didn't really adjust either. It started to ratchet down and look a little bit more like the old school Seahawks attack, which means grind the ball out, kind of forget that DK Metcalf exists. And again, a lot of supposition from Seahawks fans was, oh, that's Pete exerting his influence in his final year. Like, no, we're going to do this. Now, we don't know if that's true. We don't know if Pete was hands off, hands on. We have no idea. But Waldron's kind of creativity and fun flair from the first half of the season didn't really carry through. He got figured out a little bit, as all offensive coordinators do once everybody gets tape on it. And then he wasn't able to sort of come with the second piece of the combination to really hit the jaw. So I'm hoping that we see that. He certainly has as much or more talent, which is kind of ridiculous considering the offense in Seattle is pretty well loaded. The offense for the Bears, you said this year, is really loaded. So he's got all the tools he needs. It'll be fun to see how it happens. He wasn't necessarily my choice. I really wanted Ryan Grubb, who ended up, strangely enough, replacing him in Seattle, the UW offensive coordinator. I thought his system would be really fun. So it'll be fun to watch him in Seattle. But Waldron, I think, again, the table's set really well, and we'll see how quickly he can get folks to pick up what is a really creative and fun system that I think matches the personnel.
Cool. Just ask JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigma's opinion.
I don't have to. I already know. I was a huge JSN truther, and I believe he's going to have a really good year under Grubb. But I was the one saying, hey, it might be slow for the first half of the year, but in the second half, they're going to light JSN up. And they never did.
Did you see his comments?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I was well aware. I was like, so say something nice about your former boss. And he was like,
are we live?
I was on it's funny. I was on a Las Vegas podcast talking about our Raiders episode with the ESPN affiliate out there a couple days ago. And he's like, so Luke Getsy. And I was like, yes, he exists. I don't have a lot of great things to say about him. Like, I hope it's better for all of you. And again, it should be, but yeah, it's always funny when you get that stuff moving on.
I think it was smart for the Bears too, like, because there was all this debate of like, was it Fields? Was it Getsy? Lots of good debate to be had there, but the Bears were just like, let's just not risk that.
And the answer is it was both. Yeah, it
let's
was
get
both.
them both out here.
And we need to do exactly that and clean the slate, because it was both. There were times that Getsy schemed stuff up that it didn't get executed, and there were times that Getsy schemed stuff up that was not good. So
yeah, I agree. Yep. Okay, let's talk about the offensive line as we continue to talk about the surrounding cast. What, if any, pieces on this offensive line, like specific players maybe, are you worried about for how it looks heading into the year?
It's interesting because heading into the draft, I had conversations with a lot of Chicago media and a lot of Chicago fans, and they were like, "Well, the inside three is good," and I was like, "It is it? Are you sure?" Because Tevin Jenkins has been an absolute beast when he's been on the field, but
Hmm.
his problem has been availability. So once they let him settle in at left guard, he has been extremely effective. Stop me if you've heard this. A Bears guard who's extremely effective and physical when he's on the field. It is very much the Kyle Long arc.
Oh,
And
Kyle Long.
he
Yeah, yeah.
and he needs to stay on the field. So that's his question. When he's on the field, he's been tremendous. I don't have questions about his play in terms of assignment soundness, certainly not of his physical ability to execute his role has been excellent.
Hmm.
Um, Center has been a nasty hole for 2 years. 2 years ago, I was sure they were going to draft a center. They didn't. Last year, I was like, okay, they learned their lesson. They're absolutely going to draft a center. They didn't. We saw what happened. This year, it's strange to me because Ryan Poles is a former offensive lineman. He fully understands the need to get this done and how important it is to an offensive line. And for some reason, he was a bit blind to that, thought it was going to work better than it did. Look, it happens to all general managers, but it really destroyed a lot of what they tried to do on offense. This year, doubled, if not tripled down on center with free agency ads, trades, great, cool. I think center is better. But going into the draft, I was like, the Bears still need a center. They end up getting it through
Yeah.
free agency. Right guard, everybody's like, well, Nate's fine. And I was like, what? Because again, had a hard time getting on the field. And when he got on the field, it was a 50-50 proposition. There were a lot of
Hmm.
bad games on tape for him last year. So it was kind of like, are you sure the inside three is set? I'm really not. And I think they're going to make Nate earn the right guard spot. And I think that's proper. And Bates has a lot of experience at guard. And I think based on what we've seen from tape the last year, certainly Bates is a better player right now than Nate is. So that's an upgrade. And again, no matter who wins that spot, that's probably just the starting lineup going into training camp, which just started. But we'll see how it plays out. It's a good thing if they both play well. But I think that starting five allows you to have at least a base level of competence on the offensive line, which is going to be super important if you have a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that into the mix there because, yeah, just because you're paying a guy doesn't mean he has to start. Like, look at what the Giants did with Mark Lewinsky and just how quickly they rid themselves of that. So, that certainly was not kind of on my radar. So I'm glad it is. And I think Coleman Shelton could hold up pretty well at center. I feel like
He's done very well in similar
yeah,
schemes, playing for McVay. And again, a base level of competence. I'm going to say this again for the people in the back. For the Bears at center would be a massive upgrade. I mean, I don't care if he plays like the 18th or 20th best center in the league. That would be a step up from the garbage fire that they've had for the past few
yeah,
years, which has just caved in everything. Like no offense performs well with quick interior pressure. And the Bears saw tons of it over the last 2 years. So if they can just kind of hold the line, they'll be fine.
yeah. I think we probably both agree they don't have like crazy top 10 upside, or maybe, even top 16 is like, oh, that's a little tight. But yeah, just get you like 18th, 20th ranked offensive line play this year would be very workable for Caleb. I do want to reflect a little bit on last year with the offensive line and ask you, like, one of my big stances on this is that a lot of Bears fans don't realize how much Justin Fields made the offensive line look worse by how long he holds onto the ball and invites pressure. And I don't like his pocket presence. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no. There are definitely times that was true, 100%. And
Mhm.
that was the book on Justin coming out of Ohio State is sometimes those reads take too long to develop. And he has not developed a lot since he hit the league in that area. In
Yeah.
his 3 years, he has not progressed as far as a lot of us who scouted him coming out hoped he would, because that was the major downside. There are a lot of upsides. That was the major downside. So there are definitely times that he set too deep, ran out of clean pockets, did things that really flummox offensive linemen. They don't like it. It's hard for them to deal
Mhm.
with. It's inconsistent. And a lot of that inconsistency came from there were a great many plays, as I said, where he stepped back and before he was even hitting the top of his drop, two of the three guys in front of him had already
Sure.
lost. So
Yeah.
he wasn't really setting up. He was not even with his back foot in the ground going, well, I got two guys in my face. Huh. All right. Well, time to just flip the switch and do whatever, because if I stand here, I'm going to get destroyed. And that carries over. If you don't know when something's going to fail, you act as if it's going to fail all the time, even
Yeah.
when it doesn't. So
Yeah.
he got skittish, and I don't blame him. 300 pounders bearing
Right.
down on you with ill intentions, like, and you don't know when that's going to happen. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You're dropping back going, is this the time? Do I get 2 seconds or no? And so it just kind of crushed everything. And again, that goes back to having a strong interior trio. Drew Brees said it, like, I need three guys in front of me. The tackles I can
Yeah.
deal with. I can negotiate that as a quarterback with pre-snaps reads, with adjustments, with protection shifts, with knowing who's hot. I can get the outside pressure handled. But if somebody comes in my face at 1.5 seconds, there's not a lot I can do about it. And I
Yeah.
think that's all quarterbacks. And so got to solid up that interior. Certainly he made it look worse sometimes. Certainly he made it look better sometimes. There were plays he absolutely pulled out of the fire that 95% of quarterbacks in the world couldn't. So
Hmm.
it was a really mixed bag, but inconsistency in general will kill any offense. And again, is it going to be a high variance awesome play? Is it going to be a huge loss? And there's just no way to get drive to drive consistency.
Yeah. Yep. And Caleb's not, you know, invincible to that either. So I agree. I think that was really well said. Okay, let's talk about the running back room. When this team signed DeAndre Swift, like right away in free
Yes.
agency, like I went live. It
Immediately.
was like I went live on YouTube and it's like, oh, DeAndre Swift got the bag from the Bears. And then I was like excited for a second because it's like, oh, this is awesome. Free agency's happening. And then I was like, wait, why?
Why? Yeah.
so
Uh,
so so what's your take on that signing and kind of the running back room in general?
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I was like, "Oh, this is," because again, we all know how free agency works. It starts a little bit before the combine. The actual conversations happen with agents at the combine. Hey, if we were to go after your guy, what would it take? Is this an early thing? Is this a late thing? Do you have a lot of interest? Of course, agents are going to say, yeah, we do. But all those conversations for all the positions start at the combine. And teams kind of start setting their boards because they have so much to spend. They know they're probably going to lose some of their own guys. They have to prioritize where those dollars go. So the first move, the big money moves, the early day moves are the ones that have been sort of thought about and vetted and bounced around the building. Like, they are not whim moves. Those come later
Yeah.
when, like, oh, blank's still available. We didn't think he was going to be there. Let's make him an offer. He can make our team better. That does happen later, second wave, third wave of free agency. That stuff you see on day one, that was done weeks ago. So it was
Right.
shocking to me that it was running back. And I don't want to say shocking, surprising to me that it was Swift. So my initial reaction was, okay, like, that's what you're doing first. That's what you think is most important. But they did last year too. They have a different view of this than I do because they signed linebackers for big dollars, inside linebackers for big dollars last year.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I get it. Again, I came around to the Edmonds signing, and basically you're getting a player that's a little bit younger than Roquan for a little bit less money and still is very dynamic in the middle of your defense. I get it. But again, first, so after I got over that and I dug in on Swift and saw how he fits with the rest of the running back room, he basically gives you most of the explosiveness of Khalil Herbert, who I really like as a player, with better pass blocking. And some people will be like, but DeAndre Swift's not a great pass blocker. He's not the pass
Yeah.
blocker that Roshan Johnson is, but he is passable. And Khalil Herbert, for the most part, has not been. His pass blocking stats are not great. Can't really count on him.
Mhm.
So who are you going to have as RB1 in an offense that really needs an RB1? If you look at Waldron's offense, like, he worked Kenneth Walker to
Mhm.
great effect, but he obviously was in on this and said, I need somebody that I can have out there more often that's not going to get our presumable number one rookie pick quarterback killed, who keeps some of that explosiveness, because I count on it. I count on that explosive play element in the run game. So when you look at it that way, you go, oh, Swift is Swift is probably one of the guys near the top of the market. And then it's interesting, if you've been watching the offseason Giants Hard
Yeah.
Knocks, they sort of validated that when they were talking about running back options. Swift was like the first guy they mentioned, and the salary was really
Hmm.
close to the same. It was an estimate. It was before he was signed. And so for
Yeah.
people saying, "Oh, you could have waited and signed Swift for less," I don't think you probably could have. That was
Right.
generally the set that NFL teams had on him, and the Bears said we want him, which meant they had to do it early. Little surprising, but as you sort of go back and pick it all apart, okay, I get it.
Okay. So right now is average draft position for fantasy football is RB 26.
Yep.
If you're sitting there doing a best ball draft or whatever, like,
hmm
do you find yourself drafting DeAndre Swift or not so much?
Not early, not as early as they
Yeah.
signed him in free agency. Let's put it that way. But if you get
Yeah.
down there and maybe you're to the 20th spot, or maybe you're at 26th in the RB rankings,
Yeah.
I think he'll finish better than that. I really do.
You do.
A lot better than that? No, probably not. But if you're looking for a slice of value late in a draft, he is going to be RB1. He is going to get work. The OC does run the ball. Uh, you know, I yeah, I would take a piece of it. Would I do it early? No.
Okay. So it sounds like you think Herbert's just out of the picture now. Like maybe
I
even
really
like
think
trade
he's
candidate type of deal.
I don't think he's a trade candidate. I think they really do like him, and I think he'll come into again. He brings you an explosive play element that is legit, and that's the thing I love about Khalil Herbert. He's pretty good in the
Right.
passing game, and he is elusive. He breaks tackles, and he gets chunk gains. Which, if you're gonna do the running game in the modern NFL, you need it to be explosive. In the 3 yards and cloud of dust thing, you just don't have enough plays to make that worthwhile. So you need a guy that when he touches the ball can rip off a chunk, and Khalil Herbert can do that. And I think he'll come in relief. Like Swift is not the biggest guy, and it's a long season. So Khalil Herbert will get his work. I don't think as much work as we thought he was going to get. At the end of last season, we thought, oh, this is
Yeah.
possibly an RB1 guy. He's definitely not that. And then Roshan Johnson's going to be the changeup. And again, we have a blueprint for that in Waldron's offense. And I think he could be getting some goal line work. And again, third and long, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him out there because he is the best pass protecting running back the Bears have.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, one last player question here is about Javon Dexter, the second round pick defensive tackle last year. I mean, to me, he's the biggest wild card X factor for this defense. Just real quick, do you agree with that statement?
I'll split hairs with you and say there's some other guys I think are bigger wild cards. I actually feel pretty solid about how Javon played down the stretch, especially as
Okay.
a pass rusher. I was on a Bears podcast a couple weeks ago, and they were like, "Oh, do you think he's a one?" And I said, "Look, they line him up as a one sometimes, but in pass rush situations, he rushed the passer 88% of the time, like
Yeah.
regardless of alignment." So it didn't really matter where they lined him up. He was going. His job was to penetrate and get to the quarterback. So it doesn't matter. A lot of people are hung up on, is he one? Is he a three? Doesn't matter where they line him up. They are sending him, and he did a pretty good job of that, especially after Montez Sweat's arrival.
Okay. So do you think he can be this year like a two? Like when I say that, at least from my perspective, you're talking about like a 50 pressure, 8 sack piece. Because they
Mhm.
don't really have that opposite of Sweat. Do you really think Dexter could be that this year for the Bears?
I think that's a ceiling, and I think he could reach it. I think the actuality might be a little bit below that, but his pressure numbers are going to be good. And again, Bears in their opening training camp press conference yesterday said they're happy with the guys they have on the defensive line. Of course, they're going to keep looking. All teams do. I still think they probably add somebody at the opposite end, whether that's bringing back Ngakwe, which I'm not wild about. Ogba is a possibility. I think that would be a really interesting setup with two sort of power rushers on the edge.
Hmm.
But the balance is going to shift a little bit. And really last year, even after Sweat's arrival, it was Dexter and Sweat, and that was it. And if you only have two, offenses can key on that and slow that down.
Yeah.
If you have two and a half or three that are legitimate threats, and then so in terms of wild cards, like Zach Pickens was an absolute, he did not have a great rookie season.
Hmm.
Got to see an interview that some friends of mine did with Zach Pickens, and he talked very openly about that and about how Dexter kind of led him through that and said, "Hey, man, we're supposed to be rookies. We're supposed to get our ass kicked," and really kind of pulled him out
Yeah.
of a dark place by his own admission. He if he gives the Bears anything, that's a huge bonus because a lot of people
Right.
think the Pickens pick is just a sunk cost at this point. If he comes in, even rotationally, and gives them a little gas on pass rush, that's great. And then Austin Booker was my guy in the draft, and the Bears
Yeah.
traded back up into the draft to get him. And Eric Washington came out on the Bears thing, 1920 House Drive, and said, there's a thing about Book. There's explosive, there's athleticism there, and he's not willing to just concede that like he's a rookie and his time will come. He's gonna press. And if he brings again anything, he or Pickens brings anything to that
Yeah.
pass rush, and the Bears add somebody, I really think Dexter's going to be a force multiplier in that case because they're not going to be able to key on him all the time. And he has the talent to pay that off.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I agree. I like him. I like his trajectory. All right. We're just at the 30-minute mark. I do want to just get your answers for the superlatives because I think they're fun.
Sure.
So let's just do kind of like speed round superlatives. I got 5 of them for you. Who's your team MVP for the Bears?
I hope to hell it's Caleb. It better
Yeah.
be. If not,
Yeah.
then DJ Moore or Sweat. That's my offensive and defensive pick. But really,
Yep.
look, it's all about Caleb.
I think that's a fair answer. Okay. Unsung hero.
Got to be center on offense. So either Coleman or Bates, whoever ends up there is, again, I'm going to just keep pounding the table. On defense, I'm going to go with Kevin Byard. I really think that's
Okay.
a sneaky good addition.
Yeah, he'll be stable back there, if nothing else. Breakout offensive player.
This is going to surprise some people. I'm going to go Darnell Wright.
Okay.
I think Darnell Wright's going to dominate people this year. There were times he was playing with
Okay.
one arm, holding off really good rushers last year, like really good rushers. As a fully healthy second-year player, I think Darnell Wright's going to beat some people up.
All right. Breakout defense.
Dexter is a really easy answer. I think Tyreek Stevenson is the other one. He started to figure out like how much he could get away with at the end of last year, and you saw the light come on, and he was again approaching the ceiling that we were hoping for him in the draft. Again, he's got a very good corner next to him. Like one of those two guys, Dexter or Stevenson.
Yeah, Stevenson's fun to me because at least for me, he felt like he was going to be able to bump and run like man coverage, but they're a very zone heavy defense in Chicago. And that was like, as soon as he figures that out, like you said, the light's going to come on. And there was some pretty scary stuff. I was really upset when you guys got Stevenson in the second round. I'll be honest.
Well, that just goes back and forth because the Packers front office sees the draft very similar to me, and they always pick guys, at least 2 guys that I really like, and I just have to eat it.
Yep. Okay, and the last one is most to prove.
Caleb, for sure. Chicago hasn't had a quarterback in the modern era, and the city is incredibly thirsty for it. And look, you need it in the modern NFL. If you don't have one, you're not going to compete. Look at the final 8 every year, especially the final 4. You have quarterbacks who can make plays when the time comes. And Chicago has not had that in a very long time. And it's got to happen for this team to move forward. So it's got to be Caleb.
All right. And then the last thing I do have to ask you as we wrap this up here, I've been doing this with every guest, asking if they would take the over or under on their team. And we'll have to have some sort of a bet between the two of us, whether it's a sandwich or Canes in Dallas for the Shrine Bowl or something.
$50 to the opposite's favorite charity.
Okay. I'm down.
Done.
I'm game for that. All right. So the pressure's on you then. The over-under is 8.5. So you have to pick this right.
Yep. I'm going over. And it's barely over, but I'm going over. I'll take 9, I think, pretty solidly. I feel good about that. 10 would be amazing. Everybody's saying double-digit wins, and I'm like, hey, pump the brakes a little bit. Winning season, over 500, which is 9 wins, I can see it. I mean, there's a lot of talent there. I do believe in Caleb. We'll see how the coaching staff manages what they have on the table. But I think 9 wins is absolutely possible. Sure, things can happen. But if people stay healthy, I think 9 wins is completely realistic.
Okay, great. I love it. I get to root against the Bears, but everybody wins in the end. It's a perfect bet.
There you go.
All right, EJ. Anything else you got before we get out of here?
I mean, besides the fact that you know that I hate your team and I do this anyways, so that's just a nod to how much I appreciate your content.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And EJ, thanks for your time. We'll see everybody later. So thank you, EJ, again for coming on. And thank you, all of you, for watching. If you're still with us here 2+ hours into this thing, you are the real deep dive diehards. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't hit that like button yet, please do. Drop your comments down below. What do you think of the ranking on the Bears? Did I get anything wrong here? Who do you think comes next? Let me know all of it in the comments down below. Appreciate you all again, and we'll see you soon for the next deep dive. Peace out.